Good morning and welcome to NCEDA's 2020 Annual Conference. I'm Randall Johnson, your NCEDA President and Annual Conference Chair. One of my favorite things to do every year is to gather with all of you at the beach for a few days, to learn from expert leaders in our field, and to enjoy connecting with friends and colleagues from across North Carolina. While we're not able to be together in person this year, we've planned some fun and interesting ways for us to connect virtually today. And we've lined up a great program of leadership perspectives to sharpen our focus on the decade ahead. The greatest assets we have as an organization are our members and our generous sponsors. First, thank you to our members who served on the annual conference committee this year to guide the development of today's program. You'll see their names listed here, and we appreciate your service. NCEDA is also grateful for our sponsors' generosity, enabling us to produce valuable professional development offerings and events for our members, whether in person or virtual, such as today's annual conference. So we thank you, our annual conference gold sponsors, 365 Degree Total Marketing, Duke Energy, ECS Southeast, Electricities of North Carolina Electric Cooperatives, Centera Corporation, and Terracon Consultants. Our silver sponsors, Withers Ravenel, our bronze sponsors, Draper Aiden Associates, MVP Southgate, and North Carolina Southeast, and our program sponsors, Agricel, Allen Tate Relocation and Corporate Services, Alliance Consulting Engineers, Brand Acceleration, Burke Development Inc., Clark Nexon, the EI Group, LS3P Associates, McGill Associates, McKim and Creed, Moore County Partners for Progress, Southern Industrial Constructors, Stewart, Thomas & Hutton, and Timmons Group. And there's also a long list of supporters who help NCEDA all year, year in and year out, to bring you these programs, our annual sponsors, who we'll showcase later this morning. I know NCEDA members join me in thanking these generous organizations and companies for the important role they play in our mission 365 days a year. I attended my first NCEDA annual conference in 2005. The theme that year, 15 years ago, was Changing Tides, the shifting landscape of economic development. Looking at that brochure again recently made me think of how much progress and growth we've seen as a state since then, while so many of our concerns remain the same. Today, we'll consider where we want to be as a state and as an economic development community 10 years from now. We'll look at some of the bright spots and growth opportunities in our economy, including in the life sciences sector and the aerospace sector. We'll hear about the quality of jobs in North Carolina, as well as the recent and projected shifts in demographics and population in the state, and we'll explore ways to prepare our state for growth over the next decade. Just as frontline workers and first responders are critical to managing the COVID-19 health crisis we're all facing in our communities, economic developers are the frontline workers for our economy. We must continue to support economic developers at all levels in the state, and to provide them the funding and tools they need to keep our economy resilient during these difficult times, and to help our state's economy recover from the COVID-19 impacts as the pandemic eventually subsides. The fact is, many of the assets and strengths that make North Carolina so attractive and our economy so vibrant will remain long after COVID-19. We must ensure we maintain our capacity to build on these economic strengths when the pandemic subsides, by continuing to support our frontline economic development workers. Despite the challenging times we all find ourselves in now, the future is bright in North Carolina, and I think we'll see evidence of that today. Before we welcome our stellar program of guest speakers today, let's take a look at where the organization stands and where we plan to grow over the next year. First, thank you to all of you, NCEDA's members and sponsors, for continuing to support and stay engaged with NCEDA. Because of your membership, financial support, and participation in NCEDA's webinars, conferences, and other activities, our organization remains strong and well positioned for success during these interesting times we all find ourselves navigating. I'm pleased to report our NCEDA board met recently for our annual planning session, where we reaffirmed our mission and set the stage for a productive year for our association. The first thing we did, however, was to express our gratitude to past President Pat Mitchell for her leadership last year. We appreciate her exceptional service. Thank you, Pat. I can also tell you, you can be proud of your board this year. We have an exceptional team of professionals wholeheartedly contributing their time, expertise, and ideas to make NCEDA successful during these difficult times. They're a thoughtful, creative, and action-oriented group, and it's clear we're going to have a great year with their guidance and leadership. At our planning session, we reaffirmed our commitment to our current programs and activities, including the following. Number one, our short-term strategy of providing more webinars, including substantial professional development content, free to members as a benefit of membership while we're unable to convene in person. Number two, the need and desire to hold in-person gatherings as soon as we can, even if small, across the state, to maintain and strengthen our community's network of connections, especially as soon as we can safely get 25 or so people together in the same room. We'll hear an update in a few minutes from Josh Hallingsey, chair of the Professional Development Committee. We also reaffirmed the critical importance of the Emerging Executives Initiative to our organization, to North Carolina's economic development community, and to our state's future economic vitality. We reaffirmed NCEDA's standing as the voice for the economic development community in North Carolina with our media outreach strategy, our research committee work, and we'll hear an update from Crystal Morphus on that, and our legislative advocacy efforts. Joanna Helms will update us shortly on that effort. In addition to our ongoing, long-standing advocacy efforts at the state level, we've now expanded our reach to the federal level to support efforts in Congress that bolster our members in North Carolina. And Lawrence Bivens will update us after the morning break on that activity. We also reaffirmed our commitment to offering the highest level of service and benefit to our members by retaining our association management team, L2, at full strength, by maintaining our advocacy relationship with Smith Anderson, and by continuing to offer our conferences and professional development programs virtually using a wide range of online platforms. Consequently, we passed a budget that requires us to tap into some of our rainy day reserves this year to maintain that high level of service our members expect and deserve. In addition to all the great things we're already doing, we also made some new commitments to explore innovative ways to generate revenue to support NCEDA's mission, to focus on greater diversity and inclusion across our organization, to create a stronger grassroots advocacy effort. At the same time, we start to advocate for our members' interests at the federal level, and to support the ramp up of the new 501c3 NCEDA Foundation, which will add significant capacity to our efforts to fulfill our mission, especially to underserved, distressed, and rural communities and economic developers across North Carolina. All of these efforts help NCEDA enhance our impact and benefit to the economic development community across North Carolina, and our board believes we're on the right track. As always, though, we want to keep our communications open with all of you. We need consistent feedback from all of you, our members and sponsors, to ensure that NCEDA continues to provide the value and benefit you expect and deserve. So please keep us posted on how we're doing and what we can do better. We are in a challenging time, but our organization is strong and well positioned to weather this storm. And we will remain strong together by continuing to build our momentum on the foundation of our successes. Now, please join me in welcoming the next three speakers: Joanna Helms, who leads our NCEDA Legislative Committee, Josh Hallingsey, chair of NCEDA's Professional Development Committee, and Crystal Morphus, who leads our Research Committee, to update us on the important work of their teams, which is at the core of NCEDA's mission. Thank you. Joanna?
Thank you, Randall. While the 2020 short session was one of the strangest legislative gatherings ever, there was some positive news that came out of it. We got a great result from our advocacy on JDIG, which has been a top priority for NCEDA in these last recent years. We've long urged legislators to remove the sunset on the program. In the past, they simply extended the program on a piecemeal basis 2 or 3 years at a time. This year, coordinated advocacy between us and the North Carolina Department of Commerce resulted in the General Assembly reauthorizing the JDIG program through 2030. That's a 9-year extension, and it's the longest ever since the program was created in 2002. Mac Williams in Alamance County and Brittany Brady in Henderson County deserve our thanks for some key outreach on that. We're also grateful to Commerce Legislative Director Lex James, who is a new member of NCEDA, for his hard work to make this happen. The sunset extension builds off our success over the last 2 years, getting increases in the cap levels. There's now plenty of JDIG cap available, as well as a completely separate cap available for transformative projects. We saw this new provision make a difference last month with the 3,200 job announcement in Charlotte of Centene Corp, the state's first ever transformative JDIG project. So I like where we are with JDIG right now, and NCEDA deserves a lot of credit for taking a program that only a few years ago was at a significant risk and was building consensus across Democrats and Republicans in both the state Senate and House. As you know, JDIG brings jobs, capital investment, and tax revenue here. The program guarantees cash flow into the state treasury and through the utility account helps fund rural infrastructure. Every North Carolina community benefits from JDIG projects, regardless of where the grantee locates. NCEDA made that case, we made it well, and our legislators responded with their support. Our advocacy on rural broadband also yielded results. The Federal CARES Act provided for new CDBG funds that North Carolina has earmarked for digital infrastructure to support telehealth, distance learning, and e-government. Also, Senate Bill 212 expanded the Growing Rural Economies with Access to Technology program, known as GREAT, which NCEDA strongly supports. Grants are now available to people in underserved areas for satellite-based broadband solutions. COVID-19, in addition to creating an economic crisis, has brought into question nearly all of the assumptions we've made about North Carolina's fiscal situation. In the coming months, we will have a better feel for the state's revenue picture and a sense of what the coming budget environment will be. While the news likely won't be good, at least the timing works for the Legislative Committee, which will begin work later in the fall to consider priorities for the 2021 long session. And by early November, we'll know more about who we'll be dealing with next year. Numerous legislators are retiring this year, and the General Assembly will have plenty of new faces. Along with our lobbying council at Smith Anderson, we'll be watching the situation closely as the new leaders emerge among the committees that influence economic development issues. Liz recently put out a call for committee signups, and we hope a few of you will opt to join the Legislative Committee. The committee sets NCEDA's legislative priorities, and will have that list finalized in early 2021 as the General Assembly returns to Raleigh. I won't speculate right now on what that committee will propose, but I think it's safe to predict that in general, the goals that made sense for North Carolina's economy prior to COVID will also make sense in the recovery. I suspect we'll remain committed to talent and workforce needs, infrastructure and product development, global marketing, and other tools, rules, and resources that are vital to the economic development process and our profession. We'll work hard to build on the legacy left by former co-chair Chris Platte. Those are some big shoes to fill. Thank you, Chris. But the committee will also enjoy the savvy leadership of Chris Corey, with whom I'll be sharing the chairmanship in the coming year. We'll continue to rely on Smith Anderson, our lobbying council, and on the capable support of our management team, L2. Many thanks go out to all those individuals and to the Legislative Committee itself. It's a big group with a big statement of work, and we appreciate everyone's great ideas and hard work. 2021 should be exciting. Stay tuned.
Thank you, and hello from the mountains of beautiful Western North Carolina. I'm Josh Hollingsy, and I head up the Transylvania Economic Alliance in Brevard, North Carolina, the land of waterfalls. I have the privilege of co-chairing NCDA's Professional Development Committee, and it is my pleasure to be able to provide a quick review and update on behalf of the committee. First, my co-chair, Ryan Nance, and I would like to take a moment and thank you, our members. Over the last several months, or what seems like multiple lifetimes now, NCDA has moved our in-person professional development and networking opportunities to try and to adjust our new, but hopefully temporary reality. As you likely know, we've moved professional development activities to 100% virtual content in response to our existing requirements. These opportunities don't necessarily give us the same in-person networking that we're accustomed to, but this does align with our overall goal of delivering excellent continuing education content. Virtual content has certainly been on our radar prior to our current circumstances. COVID-19 forced our hand in many ways, but one positive is it gave us the added motivation to get with the times and begin offering content that can be consumed, enjoyed from your dining rooms, home offices, and hopefully by now, your economic development professional offices. I'd like to commend our NCDA staff for their pivot to these online platforms. It has been a lot of work and they do an exceptional job, all with you in mind. I would also like to recognize our members. It's only been with the support of our engaged and willing membership that we have been able to produce and deliver quality content at a record pace at no additional cost. Our members stepped up in big ways by volunteering to develop custom content and share subject matter expertise in a time when we all need additional information. The engagement has produced an enormous amount of virtual content, and we've been averaging more than one virtual meeting webinar per week since March, with great attendance and positive feedback. Topics and presenters have ranged from experts in strategic planning, marketing, tax and accounting, BR&E strategies, and even fundraising. Your participation and feedback are invaluable. In addition to weekly opportunities, professional development engagement, one of the best aspects of our virtual content is our ability to easily record and inventory this content on our relatively new NCDA YouTube page. Please consider subscribing to this page to receive notifications when new free content is made available. Over the coming year, we'll be moving forward with our online content, and we will continue to look to you, our membership, for topics, trends, and in general ideas on the best way to get you the relevant and informative content that you're searching for. As we continue to look at our professional development activities in the near future, we want to be optimistic in our outlook. We hope to be able to resume our in-person networking and professional development opportunities as soon as North Carolina is safely allowed to hold such meetings. We know that these opportunities are likely to look different, be smaller in scale, and require different types of venues and physical distancing policies. Similar to our committee's work to host more regionalized professional development opportunities prior to COVID-19, when we are allowed, we plan to reconvene in person. We want to host those smaller regional events spread across our incredible state and perhaps taking advantage of some outdoor inspired venues. In addition, crossing my fingers, being able to reconvene in person, Ryan and I, along with our committee, would like to pursue new and more personal ways of delivering virtual content. We hope to be able to investigate opportunities to identify relevant economic development case studies unfolding in our state and then highlight those projects via video interviews. Our hope is to explore some of this virtual content will allow us to visit other communities, but also give our membership an opportunity to share their successes and perhaps, probably more important, lessons learned. Even more important to us is to be able to highlight the exceptional work of our economic development practitioners, allies, and partners, while also helping us advance our understanding of these often multi-month and probably multi-year projects. Our committee and staff will be working to flesh out this concept in the coming months, but stay tuned. In conclusion, thank you for the opportunity to serve on the board and co-chair this committee. NCA staff, as always, are around this time of year soliciting your involvement in committee work. Please consider getting involved with the Professional Development Committee. We would love to have your participation. I'd now like to introduce Crystal Morphus, a longtime member and supporter of NCDA. Crystal chairs the research committee and will let us know what the committee has planned for the upcoming year. Thanks, Crystal. Thank you, everybody.
Hello, NCEDA. I'm Crystal Morphus, Chair of the Research Committee, and I'm glad to give you a report on the committee's work from the last year and an update on what we have coming up for 2020 and 2021. The Research Committee supports NCEDA being the voice of economic development. We were created to position NCEDA as the thought leader in economic development by advancing leading concepts for professional development and policy formation. It is our goal to brainstorm those new trends and ideas and concepts in our industry, do some research on them, and then to provide that information to our members to help them in their daily work, and also to help them advocate for policy changes that are important to our profession. Our committee is full of thought leaders. We have a wide range of representation from practicing county level economic developers, regional developers. We have consultants, we have university economic development professionals, just a good mix of people on our committee. And I want to thank them for the work that they have put in really over the last few years to get this committee up and running and to produce some meaningful content for the association. But even if you're not on the committee, you can contribute to the committee's work. We do have non-committee members who author blogs for the research committee and for the membership, and also people who are not even a part of the association. So other thought leaders in the state that can contribute information like Stephanie McGarrow, and I'll mention her blog in just a minute. So if you have a great idea, feel free to reach out and become a contributor, even if you're not serving on the committee. So our projects over the last year, I just mentioned Stephanie McGarrow. She authored a blog on the links between economic development and healthcare. I'd love to go back to her and get her thoughts in the current times about that link. We all know that healthcare is important to economic development and for many reasons. But right now, it's very forefront in our minds, especially in communities that have been struggling in rural healthcare funding, for example. But I'd love to go back and revisit that if we could. Next is quality of jobs. That research project was led by Ted Abernathy, and he's going to deliver that report in just a little while. And Lawrence Bivens also contributed. We do have a goal of a significant research project each year in addition to our blog posts and other content development. So previous blogs have been on equitable economic development, the housing gap, and leadership. If you missed those, they are posted on the NCEDA website so that you can go back and read them. So what's coming up for the committee in the next year? We are going to work on a blog series on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are going to reach out to our membership, but also to organizations outside of NCEDA to contribute information on this very important and timely topic. We also have some other blogs scheduled. One is on people-based versus place-based economic development strategies. And then we want to look outside the state for some best practices and state policies and how that has uplifted rural communities. We're going to look to our southern neighbor for that one. And then of course, broadband, again, which during the current times is very much in the forefront of everyone's mind. We have had on our agenda some how-to kits, like how to build a business park, how to build a spec building, how to do other things in economic development. And Randall Johnson and Ashley Cagle are going to lead this effort this year to get us moving down the road to publishing some how-to kits. There are some other projects that are supported by members of the research committee. The NCEDA salary survey is scheduled to launch this fall and be published early next year. We do that every 2 years. You can find the previous 2 surveys on the NCEDA website and the last 2 surveys on the creativeedc.com website. We do sponsor and support that project. And then we do have a couple of members who work on the NCEDA Book Club review. These are some books that we have reviewed. If you missed those reviews, you can find the posts, the write-ups on the NCEDA website. And if you have an idea for a book review that you think the membership would enjoy, please reach out. We love for other people to contribute to the book review posts, and we'd love to have some other authors as well. So if you have ideas, if you want to contribute, if you want to lend a hand to the research committee, please reach out to me. There's my email. I'll be glad to incorporate your ideas and find a way for you to contribute to our research committee. So next, it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Ted Abernathy, the Managing Partner of Economic Leadership. He is going to deliver the Research Committee's report on the quality of jobs. And I mentioned that Ted led that project along with Lawrence Bivens, and we're very excited to hear what they have to say. Ted has 35 years of economic development experience in leading both programs and workforce development programs. He was a practitioner for 28 years. The last 8 of those, many of you remember, was at the Research Triangle Regional Partnership. After that, for about 5 years, Ted was the executive director of the Southern Growth Policies Board. Many of you know his work from that time. And in 2013, he started Economic Leadership. Since that time, he has consulted on over 100 projects across the U.S. Ted is a thought leader in our field. We are very fortunate to have him on the research committee and very fortunate to have Ted and Lawrence leading this important work analyzing the quality of jobs. Ted's segment is sponsored by Electricities of North Carolina. We very much appreciate their sponsorship of this work and also their sponsorship of the association in general. Electricities has been a long time supporter of NCEDA. So I look forward to hearing from you, to hearing your bright ideas. We look forward to having your contributions on the research committee. Thank you.
So good morning, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be with you live this morning. I wanted to do this live because the virtual stuff is something we're all getting our arms around. I've got 10 minutes, 12 slides, and the purpose of this, like the purpose of a lot of what we do at the research committee, is just to make you think. What if I told you that when we went out and talked to citizens, 80% of them said that creating opportunity in a community is necessary but not sufficient, and that a rising tide doesn't actually raise all the boats? We started talking to people on another project I was doing, and when I brought it up with the research committee, they said, well, dig into that a little bit more. So we decided to start talking about the quality of jobs. And if you can put this first slide up for me, and then let's see if we can get that on the screen. The question is, what's a good job? And you know, Gallup a few years ago did a worldwide study on what people wanted, and they didn't say love and they didn't say children. They said a good job was the #1 thing that people wanted in their lives. And when you think about you know, the idea that a good job is what everyone's going for, if you'll switch the slide, you know, what is a good job? And I cannot see the slides, so let's see if the person operating them will switch it. There we go. When you think about what a good job is, people have started measuring it. And good jobs are measured a lot of different ways, but a couple things that have happened is the group has started measuring quality of jobs, whether or not the balance of the jobs pay above average wages. And so this is sort of the inequity model that you're hearing a lot about today. And what's happened is the overall quality of jobs has been declining. More concentrated wealth at the top end of jobs, fewer jobs that pay in the middle. Next slide, please. And that's happened for a lot of different reasons. There have been bounces along the way. We've had economic disruptions over the few years. But when we're trying to measure jobs, people have figured out a way to do it. Next slide. Another group, Brookings, some of you know, have started talking about opportunity jobs. And they've measured the jobs that pay a middle-class wage and have some benefits. And if you'll click, if the person with the slides will click them a couple times to bring up the next 3 just clicks for me. What you find is that it's hard to have good jobs today without a college education. And we all know that a lot of jobs don't need a college education, but 56% of the jobs they looked at across the country, and they looked at the 100 top metro areas, didn't pay a wage that allowed people to have a good job. Okay. So what we're doing with this project, and we'll put this out in a blog, is looking at overall what people think good jobs are. And then we're going to drill down to North Carolina. If you'll go to the next slide, please. In opportunity jobs, one good thing that happened is Brookings went out and did this for every major metro, including lots of metros in North Carolina. This one is for Winston-Salem. And they looked at jobs based on where they were in the industry. So in Winston-Salem, which jobs and which industries were good for people with BAs, but were also good for people without BAs. Next slide, please. And these are for all the places in North Carolina. You can get that. Next slide.
So we're rolling. We're good.
All right. If you'll just press about 4 more times and put yourself on mute. What we did in North Carolina is to begin to look at where the jobs were going. So which jobs in North Carolina, by what categories, were going to our rural areas, which were going to our suburban counties, the ones that are defined by the rural center that way, about 14 counties, and which ones are going to our urban counties. And what you can see is the jobs are spread out. For those jobs that are opportunity jobs in manufacturing or construction, many of them are in our suburban counties. Some are growing in our rural. Most of the high jobs with BAs are concentrating in our urban counties. We have the data for all 100 counties that we'll provide to everyone. Next slide, please. We looked next at what was a living wage. As economic developers, maybe 10 years ago, we didn't talk about living wages very often, but recently that's been a topic that people have discussed. And we looked not at different groups' definitions of it because they can be controversial, but we looked at MIT's wage metrics, their calculator. And overall, a living wage, sometimes some of us don't know what that means because you've got living wages and you've got poverty wages. Well, living wage is the bare minimum. It includes how do you just survive, and one set of clothing, no entertainment budget, the bare bones. And we started looking through those. This one happens to be Goldsboro's, what it takes to be a living wage. And unfortunately, in North Carolina, in many of our cities, the average to get to just a living wage, if you're one person with one child, is close to $50,000. And we all know that a lot of the jobs don't pay that. So we're going to put in our blog all the living wage for one person living alone and for one person living with a child, and what does that cost to live in North Carolina. Next slide, please. We looked at the percentage of jobs in every county that pay above a living wage for just one adult, living by yourself. And the good news is that most jobs in our state pay that living wage. So if you're by yourself, you don't have any dependents, then the jobs will be able to support you. Next slide. But when we look at one person with a child, it changes dramatically. And just to give you a rough number, if it's one person living alone, they can support themselves, they can eat, they don't have child care, they have to pay their taxes and health care, $12 an hour, a little bit under that is a living wage. But if you have one child and you have health care and child care, that number goes to $22, $23 an hour. And what you can see on the chart here is none of our counties even have half their jobs that pay a living wage. So even the #1 county is Durham, 40-some% of its jobs pay a living wage. It means that if you have a child, half the jobs in the community aren't high enough. Next slide, please. I got in trouble when I first started economic leadership. I spoke to the North Carolina legislator and I put a chart, a map that looked like this up, and pointed out that the average wage in North Carolina is about $52,000, but that only a few of our counties actually met that average wage. We reran those numbers again, and that made the newspapers, and I had a lot of legislators calling up not happy with the chart. We ran the map again recently, and the situation hasn't changed very much. A lot of our highest concentrated jobs, like a lot of our BAs, are concentrated in our urban areas. And that made me wonder what's been happening since that period of time. Next slide, please. The good news is we looked at every job in North Carolina, and the lowest wage jobs are going away. They've been reduced dramatically in all of our counties, in the urban, in the suburban, and in our rural counties. and jobs have begun to grow in the middle. So there's room for optimism here. The highest wage jobs, the over 100,000, are growing more in the urban areas. But as you can see, the jobs in the 30 to 50,000 range are growing across the state. So we have job growth by wage for every county in the state. We'll make that data available also. Next slide. The danger for all of us is as we count new jobs, and as economic developers, we're motivated just to count how many new jobs. When you look at projections for new jobs in the state for the next 10 years, many of the categories are not paying a very high wage. And it's easy to say job growth in our county went up by X amount. And I happen to know that most economic developers don't look at just job numbers. They look at all sorts of quality indicators. But from our public persona, people think that we just look at job numbers. And we're going to have to look more at that for two reasons. One, it's going to be harder and harder to find people able to work at those levels and willing to work at those levels. And we're still generating the job numbers. So as we go forward, that puts a lot of pressure on us for different thinking. Next slide, please. Reason it matters for the most part, and this is a chart we use with all of the state chambers around the country. This is a chart that maps the average wages, average income in a state by its GDP per capita, so its output, productivity. And what you can see, if you'll press one button, it'll put the line on there, is it's almost a perfect correlation of output to wages. And so what that means for us is we have to spend a lot more time focused on the productivity of our industries and our individuals to try to move North Carolina up that value. See down at the bottom, a lot of the states are southern states. We've been successful, but we've been successful not as much with moving us up that value chain as we have in just attracting jobs. North Carolina better than most, but still a challenge for all of us. Next slide. So what does COVID do to this? Well, one thing that we ought to be aware of is that the quality of jobs that are impacted the most by COVID are at the lower end. It's the travel and leisure sector, it's the retail, it's other things that pay lower jobs. What's going to happen to those jobs as we go forward is going to be anybody's guess, and we can make projections, but we know that lower end workers are disproportionately impacted. We also know there's a lot of them. And so as we move forward, watching those quality jobs will make the most difference. Final slide, please. So what do we do about it? So if you'll click once, we've got to focus more on the job quality, not just how many jobs. We need to look at jobs in a more granular way. So that means tracking more. Click again. Means that we're going, click one more time, please. Next. Means we're going to have to focus on skill sets, and then click one more time. The final thing we need to focus on is understanding that the quality of jobs is a topic area that are rising in the public eye. This idea that a rising tide doesn't raise all boats, and that there's more to this than just generating jobs, is something that's going to come. It's already a big part of many of our economic developers' lives, but it's going to be a big part as we go forward. So quality jobs is going to be the issue. It's an issue that the research committee is interested in, and an issue that permeates the rest of what we do in North Carolina. So thanks for having me with you today. When we put out all the data, we'll make it available to all NCEDA members. We look forward to having a discussion with you.
Thank you, Ted. We appreciate you being with us and serving as a kickoff speaker for our first ever virtual conference. Good morning, everyone. I'm John Nelms, and I serve as NCEDA's Vice President. I will be with you throughout the day, serving as MC for the conference. At this time, we'll move to our next segment, which is sponsored by ECS Southeast. We appreciate ECS's commitment to North Carolina's economic development community. One little note for better viewing, note in the bottom right-hand corner, you can click on the arrows to give yourself a full screen to allow you for a better viewing option. I'd like to now introduce Secretary Tony Copeland to give a North Carolina Department of Commerce update.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you, even though it's virtually. This has been a year like no other. It will continue to be a year like no other. I'm certain of that for all of us. In many ways, this is a remarkable year in a positive and maybe perhaps in a negative way also. From a positive way, I will say that from an economic development point of view as a state, we are $3 billion ahead in inward investment than where we were last year at this time. On the other hand, let's talk about in February of this year, I was speaking to you and other people, and we were looking at less than 4% unemployment, 3.5% unemployment, which was perhaps a workforce shortage. Today, we just got recent numbers and we're slightly over 8% in unemployment. But there's even been some progress there. We were over 12% at one point in time since pandemic, when the governor put a state of emergency in March of this year. So as our economy is moving forward and we have a lot of instability and unpredictability, I think the one thing that we're seeing is the fundamentals of our economy are strong. I want to remind you when we first got the first signs of COVID in early March, and the governor and all of us were looking at how we address this. Some of the things the governor took upon himself and decided is essential businesses and how we've got to be prepared to come back after this pandemic. The state of emergency from the beginning never shuttered manufacturing and never shuttered construction, which kept the core of our economy ready to come back. Now we have lost some manufacturing jobs, much of it due to supply chain issues from other states shutting down those companies. But by and large, much of our manufacturing and our construction has continued to thrive, and we are moving forward. But let me speak to you about some of the more startling things that we're dealing with our fellow citizens. We're looking at roughly 400,000 North Carolinians today who are receiving unemployment assistance. You know, it's easy for me to talk about a thriving economy, but for those people, there's much of quiet desperation happening. You know, the Division of Employment Security was equipped to do 3,000 claims a week. In April, we reached a peak of doing as many as 54,000 claims a day is what we were receiving. That was a startling revelation that we had to deal with. You know, we have begun a recovery, I believe. It's a fragile recovery. And the governor and I and the rest of the state are going to continue to work with that. I know many of your counties have been overwhelmingly impacted. We look at particularly the leisure and hospitality industry. If we look at our unemployment rate, which came out today at around 8%, it's overwhelmingly made up of leisure and hospitality. That industry has been devastated. What are some of the other problems we're looking at? As you've seen, our universities are struggling to open, our public schools are struggling to open. At the same time that all of us are working to prop up the economy and move forward and grow as we've done always. But there are encouraging signs that we're doing also. As I mentioned, we're $3.3 billion ahead in capital investment. We're basically at par where we were last year in job development in the state. At the same time, we have 400,000 people in unemployment. None of us have experienced this before. I want to talk about some of the projects that we've gotten this year. We've got many life sciences projects. North Carolina has landed the largest project in the history of the state with Centene, with 3,200 jobs and over $1 billion of investment. We've put advanced manufacturing in some of the rural areas. We've put some of the personal hygiene products in other places. We've even done some auto supply announcements. But we continue to work with those diligently. And we see a pipeline for the rest of the year continuing to be very good also. One of the things that's encouraging is we look at companies from around the world that are continuing to look at us and see us as a safe and stable place to do business with a workforce second to none. That has remained in place. You know, I'm excited about the future. I'm excited about what we're doing. I want to thank all of you for the achievements that we've done. I've been in this position nearly 4 years. I was appointed to this position in January of 2017 when the governor came in. With your help, we've brought stability back to the economic development process. We've eliminated some of the social legislation, HB2 and others, to give confidence to the world with our economy. We've continued to keep our incentives intact. We have some of the most respected incentive programs in the world, and we have maintained their integrity thanks to help with people like you and what you're doing in all of these counties. It's been a pleasure for me to work with you. It's such a great position to be in this a state like ours. You and I are both lucky. We have a great product. We have a workforce second to none. We have a healthcare system second to none in the country, and the world views us that way. I want to thank you for allowing me to work with you. I hope to continue working with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Copeland, for your leadership at the Department of Commerce and for being with us today. Our next speaker is longtime member of NCDA. Please join me in welcoming Bill Bullock with the North Carolina Biotechnology Center to spotlight the life sciences sector.
Very good. I hope everybody can hear me. Thank you, John, for the introduction. Thank you, Secretary Copeland, for your comments, for your leadership in economic development, as well as your support for the life sciences. What I'll mention in a minute is, this is a spotlight on life sciences for a few minutes, which, by the way, Randall will get mad at me if I don't start my watch here to stay on time. So there we go, 10 minutes, Randall. I hopefully, the comments of Secretary Copeland are sobering to the reality of where we are with the pandemic. Hopefully this is going to be a little bit of a bright light on some things that are going pretty well in the life sciences industry. I did want to point out, as you can see, that I'm not in my closet. I'm not in my bedroom. And in fact, I'm talking to you from the auditorium of the Biotech Center. And part of the reason that we're doing that is we've actually upgraded the center, but nobody would know that since we haven't seen anybody since March. So I want to give a quick shout out to Sean Thegan, who's our AV guru here at the center, who's going to be directing our show today. So if I could have the next slide, please. So in our time together in 10 minutes, what I really would like to touch on is three things. One is that it's been alluded to a little bit. Secretary Copeland mentioned the growth in life sciences has been pretty robust, and it's been very robust in the last 5 years. That's a little bit about where we've been, where we are today. Really want to focus on how both the kind of some changes in the life science space, as well as the pandemic, are really amplifying the strengths of North Carolina as it relates to life sciences, and then take my little crystal ball and do the best job I can to look into the future and really focus on three things: acceleration, collaboration, and localization as some themes that we see going forward. Next slide, please. I wanted to mention this up front because this is an important thing that the center's been working on, and I'll just allude to it over the course of the next few minutes. We've created a framework here at the center that we call North Carolina Life Sciences 2025. And this is really our look at some things that need to happen in North Carolina for us to continue our leadership in the life science space. I don't have time to go into great detail on it now, but note that the 4 areas that we're looking at to focus include talent, infrastructure, investment, and market attraction. So everybody keep an eye open. We're going to be rolling this out. A lot of the partners that are joining us today were part of this discussion. We look forward to a broader swath of you being involved in this conversation going forward, because it's going to take all of us to continue that leadership. Next slide, please. I'm like Ted. I like a lot of slides in a little bit of time. So my one slide on where we've been, what you see here is really a depiction of the robust growth. This is the last 15 years of life science job announcements. And what you see to the left is the 5-year period that trends to today. So to the right side is the 2016 to today, right? So what you see there is the really robust growth in the last 5 years, which really is of just about 10,000 jobs and equates to almost the combined amount over the prior 10 years. So I want to talk just briefly about these last 5 years and kind of zero in on that right bar graph. So if I could have the next slide, please. All right, there we go. So this is the last 5 years of life science job announcements in North Carolina. And what I want to focus on is the left side. And what you see on the far left is almost 3,000 jobs in the area of clinical research, regulatory, and the medical diagnostic testing space. Right next to that is biomanufacturing, and a close third is pharmaceuticals. So those three segments over the last 5 years are nearly 10,000 jobs announced in the life science space in North Carolina have been made up of those three areas. So this gets me from the kind of robust growth notion into the amplifying our strengths. These are areas that we've been good at traditionally, and as some of the trends are changing in the life science space, we're really doubling down on our strengths to really be a really notable location to kind of meet these trends where they are. Next slide, please. This is another different look at that same data from the last 5 years. And again, what you can see on the left-hand side is a lot of that growth is in manufacturing, as well as services and administrative. That services and administrative piece really captures some of the medical diagnostics and CRO component. I think the other thing that's worthy of note is the fourth bar. Just over 10% of our growth in job announcement has been in kind of the more traditional research and development and industrial space. So while we're very good at innovation in North Carolina, and a lot of our innovation in research and development is happening in small companies, we have a big opportunity here to continue to try to grow the kind of the larger industrial base in terms of attracting and growing those companies in the pure innovation side. Next slide, please. So where are we today? Don't have enough time to go in great detail, but I wanted to highlight an area that's been really hot in the last 3 years, and that's the area of gene and cell therapy. You can see on the top line a number of the companies that have chosen to expand or come to North Carolina, including Bamboo Pfizer, Bluebird Bio, Avexis, Selectus, Dentis, and then most recently this month, Beam Therapeutics out of Boston. So why the growth in this space? Well, this has only been approved, these technologies have only been approved by the FDA in the last 3 years, and they focus on generally initially these rare diseases. And the reason that I bring that up is this is a dynamic that's kind of reshaping in the context of precision medicine, more precise applications of biology to providing treatments to cure disease. And what that's done in the landscape of economic development is it's really put a premium on acceleration, right? So the clinical and development timeline is really shortened because of the nature of these types of projects and the rare disease populations that they're testing. It's really put a prime focus on mitigating risk and the ability to accelerate the timelines, but in a way that's very responsible because it's a very highly regulated industry, and so safety is paramount. So the things we're really good at traditionally in North Carolina, the diversity of our sector has really allowed these companies that are trending in a new form of advanced manufacturing and life sciences to see North Carolina as a premier destination. Next, please. So no conversation about life sciences would be complete if we didn't reference the pandemic and the coronavirus issues. Again, I think what I just talked about around North Carolina's longstanding strengths around innovation and our ability to transform that innovation into action is really playing out relative to the coronavirus pandemic. We've seen a heightened awareness of the need for speed in diagnostics, testing, devices, materials, therapeutics, vaccines, all areas that North Carolina pretty uniquely is good at across that. Our ongoing fundamentals remain very critical to our ability to attract that new investment. And then of course, workforce, and talent continues to be our holy grail of our attractiveness. All of this kind of equates in my mind to this simple of equation. You gotta have assets, you can't make that up. We have an abundance of them in North Carolina, but if you don't create great access to those assets, you diminish your ability to grow. We've done that really well, we need to keep working on that, but that combination of assets and access really has allowed us to excel in the area of acceleration, which is what companies are looking for traditionally as they come in, but really highlighted in the pandemic. Next slide, please. So where are we going? What's future look like? I'm stealing this from the Site Selectors Guild. So for anybody that is concerned about that, my apologies. But if you looked at if you happen to tune into their webinar a couple of weeks ago, looking at the future of kind of urban, suburban, rural, and what the future looks like, I thought it was just worthy of noting that when they canvassed the Guild members, that in terms of project activity going forward, they saw biotech and life sciences the #1 area. So I think that's very encouraging from an economic development perspective, given everything I just talked about how well North Carolina is positioned to continue to thrive in that area. Next slide, please. So what does that future look like? Obviously, from a life science perspective, there will continue to be a near-term focus on the pandemic. We talked a little bit about that. But a lot of the things that were already happening in the life sciences are continuing to go on, right? This convergence of biology, data science, and engineering is real, and it's continuing to move forward at a rapid rate. And it's doing so across the value chain, from research to development to manufacturing into the marketplace. And I'm gonna have the good pleasure to introduce somebody in a company to you in just a moment that really embodies this convergence and the impact that it can potentially have here in the US and North Carolina as well. I mentioned collaboration. It's always important. We've talked about it for a long time, but I think the pandemic's put a real focus on how teams work together to accelerate outcomes that are important for our population. I think that will continue to be emphasized. It really plays to this access issue of how we work together as collaboratively as we can. Companies value that. They see that it continues to be important. Issues of longstanding discussions around advanced manufacturing and automation. We're going to hear a little bit more about that in just a second too. But workforce. We have to continue to build our workforce to be able to meet that demand. And then lastly, I wanted to just mention localization and the topic around reshoring and domestic supply chain. And my overarching comment here and my perspective on this from the standpoint of life sciences, there's absolutely a conversation going on there, but it depends which conversation you're having, right? So reshoring was happening before the pandemic, certainly in the life science space, given the shrinking differential in wages and some of the other issues, but it depends what you talk about. If you talk about pharmaceuticals, it's a complicated discussion. That's a very distributed pipeline of supply chain that feeds pharma. There'll have to be some incentives. There'll have to be some focus on national security probably to make that happen, and that will probably take a while. But there's also some very near-term opportunities that are out there. In the area, one example is PPE, where I think that's happening today, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. So I want to finish my comments before I make my introduction with one last slide, please. And so I just wanted to highlight that to some of Ted's comments, right? That it's not just the quality of the job, but who has access to those jobs. And so while the triangle continues to be kind of the epicenter of a lot of our life science activity, this is a technology that's benefiting statewide. And our offices across the state are working with partners, all of you in your communities, through a whole series of different programs that I won't go through right now given the time constraints. But we have things in workforce, we have regional health initiatives, we have a medical device testing center of excellence project. We are working on scaling something called NC Bioneer Venture Challenge that Randall in the Southeast with some partners put on just recently. We've got a veterans outreach program looking how to take the 23,000 transitioning military in North Carolina and connect them closer to jobs in the life sciences, and how we continue to increase the breadth of what we do to things like medical devices, where we have a consortium in Charlotte. So with that, I'm going to end my comments. What's really exciting about my introduction of the next person is I'm up here just talking the talk, which is fine. That's what I get paid to do. But I've got somebody who's actually walking the walk here. And so if you look at what I just talked about, the opportunities that are being brought about through the coronavirus, and it's highlighting the integration of advanced manufacturing with biology, with digital science and material sciences, and how that can transform communities across the US, and the value of domesticating your supply chain, all things I alluded to. I have the good pleasure of introducing the founder and CEO of a company called Laws of Motion, and their CEO, Carly Beege. And Carly is a dynamo, as you'll see in a second. And I think what's really compelling is she has walked this walk. She has domesticated her supply chain. She's really taken the garment industry and brought it into the 21st century around advanced manufacturing, and is using that not only to create great products, but to really create a platform for transforming communities, hopefully here in North Carolina, but certainly all across the US. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Carly, and thanks for your time.
Bill, thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Carly Beege, and I'm the founder and CEO of Laws of Motion. Laws of Motion is a brand that believes in being a force at whatever it is that you choose to do. And more specifically, we make clothes that fit. It started as an idea when I was a management consultant, and I went shopping one Saturday with a male colleague of mine and saw for the first time rather, how the other half shopped. Right, so he went into a semi-custom menswear shop and he sipped whiskey and picked fabric and got measured, and he was out the door in 30 minutes. And then I spent my entire Saturday up and down, Fifth Avenue, trying to find a basic black dress that sort of fit, was sort of my style. Took to get tailored, waited a week, and in the end, I paid twice the price for something I liked half as much. And I went back to my consulting team that Monday and I said, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to find a way to use data science to make perfect fitting women's clothing, and that's what we did. Next slide, please. Laws of Motion started as a direct-to-consumer women's wear brand that combines on-demand American-based manufacturing, textile innovation, and broader data science to deliver perfect-fitting women's clothing in a very innovative and scalable way. We started with quite the bang. Next slide, please. We reached our first month's month's revenue target on day one. We then saw over 100% month-over-month growth as we scaled. Spent time with the Today Show and Fast Company. We're a Time Magazine Invention of the Year in 2019. And then COVID hit. Next slide, please. Now, what's interesting about being a New York City-based brand is that we were quite literally, in the middle of all of this and experiencing firsthand what a dire need there was for PPE in the United States. And you would hear from friends and physicians who were working in hospitals that they were wearing trash bags and tablecloths and re-wearing, N95s multiple days in a row. And I was very sick myself. Then early March, I had COVID. And it was during that time that the Laws of Motion team said, this is when we dig into the ingenuity and the innovation that got us here. And we are going to pivot and we are going to do everything that we can do to help. Next slide, please. That started as being first and foremost, as a brand that made high quality PPE in America for America. And we pivoted our entire US supply chain in order to do this. We started as a COVID task force member in New York, delivering over 2 million surgical gowns in a 5-week period surrounding the apex of COVID. We then went on to supply hospitals, other states, the federal government, and the Department of Defense. And what was really critical here is seeing just how valuable a US-based supply chain was. And that's what we're here about today. Going forward, next slide, please. Going forward, Laws of Motion will continue to invest in our state-of-the-art supply chain. We believe that innovative machinery and proprietary materials and the right assortment of products in the United States not only creates incredible economic opportunity in the form of thousands of jobs that allow you to train and grow into the 21st century, but it also allows us to safeguard and mitigate risk against dependency on foreign entities. In addition to that, there's an opportunity to introduce sustainability and zero waste in a way that we found incredibly successful as a women's wear brand, but to do that in the form of PPE and partnering with hospital systems and sustainability leaders in order to create upcycled programs that allow us to repurpose used PPE in a meaningful way in the textile production lifecycle. Next slide, please. I think whenever you think about broad scale change and bringing an industry into a kind of a new era, it's about recognizing and celebrating the heritage of what has already existed, and then investing and innovation that will carry that legacy forward. And that's exactly what Laws in Motion intends to do in North Carolina. We will do that first by bringing next generation manufacturing capabilities with state-of-the-art machinery and creating thousands of jobs that provide advanced opportunities for workers across the state. We will also invest in innovative textile production, both the formulas itself and pushing the boundaries of what's possible from a performance and medical efficacy standpoint, but really tapping into the academic institutions in the state to bring that to life. And then finally is the opportunity to drive sustainability and continue to be a leader in zero waste capabilities by introducing upcycling of raw materials and by furthering the opportunity for building development in a way that not only allows for net neutral carbon solutions, but really brings leadership to the state in terms of what's possible from a building and overall energy source standpoint. Next slide, please. We started this by saying that Laws in Motion as a brand believes in being a force at whatever it is that you choose to do. And I'm certain that together we will be a force for economic development opportunity across the state of North Carolina. Thank you.
Thank you, Carly. What exciting news for North Carolina. Thanks again, Carly. We appreciate you being with us this morning. I'd like to now welcome Margie Bukowski, who will introduce our next speaker.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to introduce Patrick Bowen, president of the Bowen National Research. He and I have worked together for the last several years, and Patrick and his firm have conducted real estate and housing assessments for 77 of the 100 counties in North Carolina. We have found his work to be incredibly advantageous as we plan the future of the Asheville and Buncombe County area. So without further ado, I want to introduce Patrick Bowen. I know you'll find him very interesting.
Thank you, Margie. It's good to see you virtually. I want to thank you folks for having us, having me speak today. Just a couple of quick comments. Depending on how your display is, I was told if you go to the bottom right-hand portion of your screen, you can enlarge the image. So that might help, particularly with the presentation of some of the maps I'm going to illustrate in a second. And then secondly, some of the slides I'm going to go through kind of quick because I've got a lot of really good, rich information, but just a short period of time to present it. So I guess all these presentations will be available on NCEDA's website at some point after the conference. So thought I'd get those out there. Our firm does, as Margie said, we do real estate research all over the United States. We're based in Ohio, but we do more work in North Carolina than anywhere in the United States. So I looked the other day, since 2010, we've done 550 studies in North Carolina. A lot of those are for individual sites and developers and projects, but we also work with a lot of communities like the folks in Asheville and with Margie and other communities around North Carolina to study the kind of the overall city or county and some of the dynamics that occur there. So what I thought I would do today is kind of share with you some of the key metrics that are occurring demographically in the state and how the state is expected to change. And with that said, we'll jump into the very first slide. So this is population growth from 2010 to 2020 across the state. And as you might expect over the last decade, most of the growth is in those darker counties. So those are more developed areas of the state, along the coastal area as well, and in Western North Carolina. You've added over 1 million people in the last decade. And again, it's really over the more developed areas of the state you've seen the growth. If you go to the next slide. That is, you switch to the next slide. There you go. That's net population migration. So what this is communities change when people are born, when people pass away, but really where the biggest dynamic affecting a lot of communities, and particularly in North Carolina, is net migration. So these are where people are coming into a county from outside. And North Carolina has so much growth, as I just talked about over the last decade, all the growth that's occurred across the state. But this is showing now where are people moving into. And so on this map, and this is through Carolina Demography, this is showing where the growth is, migration is occurring. And that's in the Raleigh-Durham area along the I-40 corridor. the north central part of the state, down by Charlotte, Mecklenburg County on the I-77 corridor, but also in the Asheville region. And then if you notice too, on the southeast part of the state, down near Brunswick and New Hanover County, which we're conducting a housing needs assessment for those good folks, you see a lot of growth that has occurred just through migration, and this is the one-year snapshot, but it does illustrate, where people are moving to in the state of North Carolina. Next slide. So this is annual population growth rates. So this is, now we're going to look to the future. I know the conference talked about looking up to the year 2030, but our crystal ball and the demographer's crystal ball isn't that good, and so it only goes up to the next 5 years. And so this is annual population growth rates up to 2025. And this is showing, again, you're going to start to see some common themes across the state, all around that Wake County, Raleigh area, as well as down there Charlotte and Union County, just southeast of Mecklenburg, substantial growth. But again, look to the southeast part of the state. You've got a lot of population growth expected to occur down near Wilmington area, and then over in the mountain area of near Asheville. So a lot of growth occurring across the state. The other thing to look at too is in those lighter pink shades is the rural areas. The more remote parts of the state are expected to lose people. And so while that could be a challenge, there are some opportunities, and I'll talk about that for those rural communities. Next slide. So this is households aged 65 and older in the year 2020 across the state. And we all hear about baby boomers and how significant they are and how they continue to grow. And so this is the concentration of, again, this is not population, this is households age 65 and older. But you can see that over 160,000 households are either in Mecklenburg or Wake County. And then through those gray shades along the I-40 corridor, as well as along I-70, you've got a lot of senior households. And again, in the southeast part of the state and over near the Asheville area. So if you go to the next slide, you're going to see where, next slide, please. Thank you. This is the growth projected for senior households over the next 5 years, and darker shades, higher growth. And I just circled some of the ones that were really standing out. And most of that growth for the senior households is in that area just outside of the Raleigh-Durham area, as well as northeast of Mecklenburg County up in Cabarrus County. And then again, you're starting to see a theme on the southeast part of the state, a lot of anticipated growth in senior households down near the Wilmington area. Now, the thing to keep in mind is this isn't all of a sudden seniors gravitating to North Carolina and gravitating to these communities. That's happening. People retire to North Carolina. It's a great place to retire. But a lot of this is just people aging in place. And so as communities and economic development, as you think forward to what should we be anticipating, and a lot of this discussion really is tying demographics to housing, which I believe is an economic factor. You have to be thinking about senior characteristics, and this wave that's coming through, we're all aware of, it still needs, communities need to plan for it. And I think a lot of communities we've talked to are starting to realize how significant this change is. Next slide, please. So this is median family household income growth. I just wanted to show a quick backward step of the last 5 years to kind of show where the growth is. Darker shades, the greater growth. The top map is an illustration of the change in family median household incomes in dollars, thousands of dollars. The bottom graph is in percent change. So no surprises here. They both show much the same thing. And you can see where the household growth has been occurring, again, in those kind of metropolitan areas, the Asheville area, and again, down in the southeast part of the state. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of 2020 median household incomes. And no surprises that the higher incomes are in, again, around those metropolitan areas. And as you can see in those pink and red shades, those are the lower income areas. So you've got a lot of lower income people. And we'll talk about that in a second in terms of matching up housing and affordability with those lower income households. And I think I've got some good illustrations to demonstrate that. Next slide, please. All right, this is annual median. Make sure I got the right slide here. annual median household income growth. So over the next 5 years, this is the percent change, annualized, where the household income is going to grow. And so I, again, just marked some of the areas that stood out to me. Wilson County, just east of the Raleigh area, is growing a lot. Orange County, northwest of the Raleigh area, is expected to grow a lot. And Charlotte's not a surprise. It's supposed to grow a lot. Most of these counties, by the way, the annual growth is supposed to fall between 1% and 2%. So you can see these counties, though, are in that getting closer to that 2% growth. And then one of the ones that surprised me a little bit was in the northwest part of the state, up in Watauga County, which is the Boone area. And that's almost at 2% growth. It's annual growth in terms of household income. So a lot of income growth in that part of the state. But nonetheless, assuming that the economy recovers, a lot of these projections were likely made before COVID took hold. So these might get downgraded a bit, but still you got some positive income growth over the next 5 years. Next slide, please. All right, this is renter household growth projected over the next 5 years. So we did incomes. Now I want to jump over just by households by tenure. I thought first we would do the renters. So this is household growth expected. This is now not annualized, but 5-year growth trend. And as you can see, most of the renter household growth, and it's substantial. It's again in that kind of Wake County, Raleigh-Durham area and extending southwest, even over to the areas near Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, and up that I-77 corridor down southeast to Union County. And then in the southeast part of the state, starting again, see a theme. A lot of renter growth is expected for that area as well. So communities have to be planning for that kind of growth. And then as you can see too, in those pink shades, a lot of rural counties, especially along the state borders on both the south and the northern end of the state, are expected to show some modest declines in renter households over the next 5 years. Next slide, please. This is median gross rent for 2018. And this is darker shades represent the higher median gross rents. And the thing to point out here, again, no surprises. It's the more metro areas, Buncombe County, Watauga again, Boone, some higher rents. All along the East Coast, higher rents. Now, so you see the lighter shades, that's representative of lower rents, median gross rents. So it must be more affordable. At least that's what the impression might be. If you go to the next slide, this is renter cost burden. So this essentially, these are households that pay more than 30% of their income towards their rent. And so if you pay more than that, you're considered cost burden. That's an economic challenge to those households, a financial challenge to them. And so what we did was we mapped those out. I think the state average is about 44%. And so you can see the kind of the pinks and the darker reds start to show the greater share of people that are cost burden. And you can see those handful of counties that are really having significant problems. But one of the ones that really stood out again, or a couple actually, to the southeast, down near New Hanover County, Wilmington area, Brunswick County, and then to the northwest, again, Watauga County and the Boone area. So more than 50% of the households are cost burden. That is significant. That's affordability challenge, and something those folks are going to have to think about, and the community is going to think about as they plan forward, because it does impact an area economically. Next slide, please. So what we did was we spent a lot of time. There's a lot of data that we have. So I hope folks, I have my contact information at the end of this presentation. Reach out to me because there's so much information. I could only get so much in the time I was allotted. But here's one of the things we did where we cut up cost burden renter households by different income levels. And what we found out was the biggest concentration of those suffering are those that make between $10,000 and $20,000 a year. So you can see we shaded that in. The darker the red, the greater share of those folks that earn between $10,000 and $20,000 a year that are cost burden. But look at that, it's more than 24 counties across the state of folks that make this income level that have over 80% of them are cost burden. So it's significant. These are the folks that are really challenging. These are a lot of your blue collar service industry workers, and they're facing a serious challenge with meeting their housing costs. Next slide, please. All right, this is owner household growth. This is 2020 2020 to 2025. It's a 5-year change. And much like the renter household growth that's expected, the owner households, much, the same areas of the state, all around the Wake County area, the Mecklenburg region, and then again, down in the southeast part of the state, you're going to see a lot of homeowner household growth. Next slide, please. This is median owner cost. So this is basically those with the mortgage and how much they're paying a month towards that housing cost. And the darker greens would generally be those that are paying over $1,500 a month. And as you would think, most of the metro areas have the higher owner cost. And again, over the mountain area near Asheville, Watauga County, again, Boone area, and all along the East Coast, those are the folks that are paying the most towards their housing in terms of home ownership. If you go to the next slide, just like the renter burden, we did cost burden. So these are now the shares of people that are paying a disproportionately high share of their income towards their home ownership. And the ones that stood out to me really were just west of Mecklenburg County and Gaston County and Cleveland County, which we also conducted a housing needs assessment in Cleveland County last year. You got a lot of folks that are homeowners that are cost burden and showing up in those reds over 40%. So renters have the greater challenge, but homeowners aren't escaping affordability issues as well. Next slide, please. So this is one that I think a lot of folks aren't thinking about that, but they really should as they kind of plan for the future in their community. This is persons under the age of 65 that have a disability. We excluded those that are 65 and older because a lot of senior folks do have disabilities. We just wanted to see those that were under age 65 to get some sense of the degree of the challenges of these folks and who have special needs and may have housing needs that have to match up with those specific challenges they have. And so as you can see, a lot of the darker greens are the higher shares, generally representing about 1 in 10 households that have some kind of disability. So as communities think forward and think about what type of housing they need to have to match up with these folks, accessibility issues and things like that, certainly there's going to be a lot of counties and a lot of part of the state that will have to face this challenge. Next slide, please. This is real quick. This is just building permits issued. We can get this obviously for, I think, back to about 10 years worth of data, but I just did 1 year snapshot real quick. Darker greens representing where the residential building permit activity is occurring. It's generally 300 or more units within an individual county. So you can see a lot of activity in most areas of the state, maybe with the exception of some of the more remote and rural parts of the far northeast and far western part of the state. Next slide, please. This is low-income tax credit allocations. And so I won't dive deep into this, but the low-income tax credit program provides incentives for developers to develop housing that target folks that make 80% or less of median household income. They do this annually. It's a competitive process. And so what we did here is we just mapped out, and I don't know that 2020 allocations were announced. If they were, they were just announced, but here's 2018 and 2019 number of units allocated through the tax credit program. And you can see the high concentration of these units serving these lower income households have been developed or at least funded. They're probably under construction now or will be in 2021. But these are where the concentrations are in Mecklenburg and up in the Raleigh area as well, Wake County, and then along that I-40 corridor and then down towards Charlotte on the I-77 corridor. But I think more than half of the counties in the state did not get any tax credit allocations, and there's reasons for that, but basically is indicating that the low-income tax credit program isn't reaching into rural North Carolina. Next slide, please. I throw this in because of what we're going through with COVID-19 and a lot of people working from home and kids learning from home. And so I threw this in to show you the share of households that have, this would be households that have subscribed to broadband internet. And you can see the concentration of those, the darker greens representing the highest shares, generally over 80%. And then the lighter shades, though, that's really what stands out. It's a lot of rural counties that folks are not, do not have broadband internet. Some due to financial reasons, some due to this, it's not available to them. And I know in North Carolina, they've made efforts to expand broadband internet, but there's still a lot of folks that don't have it. And that's going to be interesting to watch over the next year, really, to see what happens with internet access and remote learning and remote working. Next slide, please. So you got internet, but also wanted to see who has a computer. And so again, this is the share of households that have a computer across the state, the central part of the state and the coastal area. It has a high, households have a high share, or a high share of households have computers. But in the rural areas, again, a lot of folks don't have them, and that will present some challenges for those folks working and learning remotely. Next slide, please. This is just people using public transit. So no surprises, it's in the metro areas, but more important, it's the rural areas of the state. Folks do not have access to, and so therefore they can't use public transit. So that poses a challenge for them to get to their jobs, to get to different services, healthcare, and things like that. The bottom graph is one that I would really be fascinated to watch over the next year or two. This is from 2018, but it shows the share of people that are working from home. And as we all know now, in fact, a lot of folks are at this conference are attending from their homes. This is the share that are across the state that are working there now, working from home now. But I suspect this is going to skyrocket over the next. It has already, but it will definitely skyrocket, I think, in the next year or two. Next slide, please. This is households with a vehicle or without a vehicle, and I did owners at the top, renters at the bottom. Really the thing that stands out on this is the bottom graph. If you look at some of those counties on the northern border of the state, many of them have more than 20% of their renter households do not have an access to a vehicle. So if you start thinking about affordability of housing, the lack of public transportation, the lack of a vehicle, and now you start to see really the difficulty that a lot of these folks in rural North Carolina face. Next slide, please. This is transportation costs as a percent of income. This is pretty stunning. This is one of the ones that I kind of caught me by surprise. And you see all the dark shades. It's really in the rural areas of the state of North Carolina where these people are paying generally, close to 40% or more of their income towards their housing costs. Throw that back to the cost burden number that I showed you for renter households in particular, where a lot of folks are paying over 30% of their income towards their housing costs. Throw this with that, and now you see they really don't have a lot of money left for discretionary spending to kind of boost your economy. And so transportation is another issue, definitely, that areas of North Carolina and the rural areas need to focus in on. Next slide, please. Commuting patterns. I'm gonna pass this slide pretty quick because I know I'm running out of time. And let me jump over to the next slide if we could. This is really the net gain of commuters on a daily basis. And so these are people commuting in, commuting out. What's the net difference? And as you can expect, a lot of areas, the metro areas, are gaining a lot of people because they're commuting in, but they're moving back out into the bedroom communities and the surrounding counties. But I can tell you this, and that I did jump over that preceding slide. There are rural parts of North Carolina, there are opportunities to grab a lot of these commuters, because even the rural communities that we've studied a lot of rural communities in the last 18 months, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia. And there are a lot of people that commute into these rural communities that don't stay. And I do believe there's an opportunity to get some of these folks if the housing was built. Next slide, please. Just a couple slides left here real quick. This is, we surveyed more than 10,000 people in the last 18 months, mostly in the Southeast United States, Midwest, and basically got their input on what are their challenges. We broke this out by what residents are facing, and it's common. Really it is. It's affordability, availability, quality of housing, and things they would hope that the community can put in as solutions. And so I listed those out. Again, you can access this full list on the NCEDA website once they post all the presentation. But again, stakeholders, much of the same thing. Development costs are coming up, lack of developable land, infrastructure costs. Again, same challenges probably a lot of you folks are facing in your communities. It's a national problem, but definitely we're learning that here in the Southeast United States. And then even employers, that's one way we've really, a lot of communities are asking us now to expand our research and get to employers and ask them what is happening. And they're having a difficulty attracting, retaining employees, in part because they don't have the housing. So I know you're focusing in on economic development, but housing is a key part of it. And that's what we're getting from a lot of the local employers in these communities we talk to. This is the last slide, and all I want to do on this one, these are, a lot of these are trends that are happening around the country in North Carolina. And so I've covered a lot of these. Really, the ones I want to cover is the last two. And I appreciate you advancing the slide without my instructions. The last two, and that is really what we're learning is, and I don't know how big this trend is going to be, but with COVID-19, there does appear to be some interest of people moving to rural communities because they have the ability now to work remotely. Their kids can now learn remotely. And so they're not as tied to a community as they used to be. There appears to be a trend of people shifting and looking to these rural communities. So it'll be fascinating to watch if that does materialize fully, or if this is a short time bump in this trend. The other one is, and we're looking at a couple university markets right now, and it'd be interesting to watch whether the reduced enrollment, but actually reduced on classes that are actually being held on campus, how that's going to affect. Some schools are delayed opening, some have reduced actual on-class enrollment. And so what is the economic impact on not just the university, not just the housing market, but on those local economies for those college towns? So a lot of interesting trends that are happening across the state. I hope that this sheds some light on some of the things to anticipate and to think about economic development. I know Ted had talked about when he was opening up about wages and living wages and things like that. And I cannot stress enough that clearly wages and job growth and all that is key to economic growth. But I guarantee you, housing has to be part of the discussion, has to be part of that formula, because if you don't have the right housing, you can't hold on to employees. And one just super quick comment, a lot of the coastal areas of the United States, and North Carolina is no exception, you've got a lot of higher rents, as I showed in the maps just a moment ago, and yet wages don't match up with those people that are working out there and try to afford to live out there. And so you get a lot of people commuting long distances to work out on the coastal areas of the country. They can't sustain it. And that's even touching now teachers and public service workers, police officers, and people like that. So this is a critical economic factor and something that I hope folks give some thought to. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Patrick. This is fascinating data. We appreciate the work you are doing and delighted you were able to join us. We're running tight on time. We've gotten a few questions. We will catalog those questions and get them to the speaker, and we will be distributing those responses out to you. We will now move to our 10-minute break. Please take some time to stretch, grab some water, and rejoin us promptly at 10:40, right, just short of 10:45, to hear from Lawrence Bivens, NCDA's Managing Director for Policy and Public Affairs, about our federal advocacy efforts. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Lawrence Bivens, NCEDA Managing Director for Policy and Public Affairs. I'm also in recent months doing double duty at the North Carolina Department of Commerce, which explains what I'm doing in the Commerce boardroom, helping Secretary Copeland and our partners here at Commerce with communications during this incredible time in the state's history. On behalf of L Squared, my partner Liz Dobbins, our colleague Emily Martin, let me thank NCEDA members and also sponsors for making today's virtual conference possible. I've been asked to spend a few minutes with you talking about our federal advocacy efforts and how NCEDA is raising its voices, extending our presence, which has long been concentrated here in Raleigh, now in the halls of Congress. We know from our reading of Mark Twain that history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. So when all this began 6 months ago, we asked, what have we learned in previous crises? And how could we apply the lessons of previous crises to this one? One thing we learned in the 2008-2009 crisis is that it's helpful to get as close to where the money is as possible. And that is Congress. The US government has the unique authority to be able to work within a budget deficit, basically invent money to put toward crises like this. And after a time, it gets to the state. After a while, it gets to communities. But we didn't do that in 2008. We left it to Congress to work out the ARRA plan, and we waited until the plan was done, and we feverishly read through it to see what it covered. This time, we thought it might be a better idea to get closer to that process while it's still going on. If you want an exact date that NCEDA's federal advocacy efforts began, it was April 14th. It was on that date that NCEDA was contacted by the American Society of Association Executives, asking us to co-sign a letter to congressional leaders asking for inclusion of 501c6 nonprofits into the payroll protection program, which had excluded C6s, such as NCEDA, such as other professional associations, and many economic development organizations, also a lot of convention and visitor bureaus. So we thought it was a very good idea to support those efforts, and we did. We immediately signed on with 150 other North Carolina nonprofits to support the ASAE in that effort. We can report that there's been progress on that front. The U.S. House of Representatives in their HEROES Act passed in May did extend the PPP to include all 501c6 all 501c nonprofits, including C6s. And in late July, the Senate Republican leadership introduced its fourth COVID stimulus package known as the HEALS Act, which also includes coverage of for the PPP for 501c6 nonprofits. Now, so we've got support in both the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate on that, but the two have not been able to get synced up. We're very pleased at the progress, though. We believe that we'll ultimately get that coverage. It's just a question of time, getting the two chambers synced up and getting a law passed and signed. Now, it's important to point out that NCEDA itself, even though it's a C6, won't really be eligible for PPP coverage because we contract out the management. There is no payroll as such. There is no rent on office space, but we do know that many of our members are C6s, and you do need this. You do need access to this program, and we're happy to help fight for it. Another important date in recent months was May the 16th, excuse me, May 21st. That was when IEDC, our national partners in Washington, contacted NCEDA and all statewide economic development associations around the country, asking us to participate in a Zoom meeting to talk about federal advocacy efforts and what we could do to help. One of their key priorities is getting additional funding for USEDA and also relaxation of the guidelines that would allow awardees to allocate some of the funding for salaries and expenses. Under current law, that's not allowable. We know that that would have a very positive benefit for economic development organizations to be able to rely on additional assistance in operating. We have done our best to respond to IEDC's request to get involved with their advocacy on this issue. I give a lot of credit to my friend Rob Van Giens, Robo in Fayetteville, who's vice chair of IEDC's policy committee, and a lot of the inspiration for this was coming from him. We have been involved. We immediately got letters out to our two U.S. senators, and they were responsive. On July 21st, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, a Democrat from New York, joined our Senator Tillis from North Carolina in co-signing a letter to the Senate leadership, Senators McConnell and Schumer, urging them to consider IEDC's position for additional appropriations for the US EDA and that one guideline change. That was a major moment, and IEDC, NCEDA, along with our counterparts in New York State, the New York State Economic Development Council, did achieve something significant there, though we still have a long way to go before we get to the finish line on this. It's very possible that we'll see some action after Labor Day and Congress returns. It's possible that we won't get any action on this until after the election. And it's even possible that we won't see action on this until next year, February perhaps. But we will remain steadfast in these advocacy efforts because we believe it's the right thing to do. We are satisfied with the degree of support that we're getting when we explain our position to congressional staff. They get it and they respond with their support. Look forward to hearing more on this in the coming weeks and months. And if you have any questions, if you would like to help us, you're welcome to do that. I am not difficult to find. Lawrence@nceda.org is my email address, and we invite your support. This all goes in addition to, not instead of, anything that we're doing on the statewide effort that you heard from Joanna this morning. Those efforts, along with our amazing legislative counsel at Smith Anderson, will certainly continue. We want you to be confident in what you're doing. We want you to be confident that your work is being recognized and supported by our elected officials, both at the state and the national level. We believe that North Carolina's position as a very purple state is actually beneficial to us because economic development is a very purple issue. We enjoy bipartisan support from pro-business Democrats, pro-business Republicans. And we believe that NCEDA has a very valuable role to play in national advocacy, and we continue to keep that up. It's now my great pleasure to introduce one of our key partners, that is Chris Chung from EDP&C. Before I do that, let me thank Duke Energy for sponsoring this segment of the program. Their amazing generosity as usual. John Nelms, you're in our MC today, and our Vice President, my longtime friend and colleague. I'd like to thank John for his leadership in making that happen. Chris Chung really needs no introduction to NCEDA audiences. A terrific gentleman, great economic development professional, scholar, colleague, partner. And we learned from our board retreat last month, which Chris participated in, that something we didn't know about him, that in addition to all the amazing things he has accomplished, there's the fact that he is also a junk food junkie, something we didn't know. We know also that he's a new father, he's a proud new father, and we might hear more about that. But I know that Chris has a lot to cover this morning, and so without further ado, let me turn our virtual platform over to Chris Chung.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. I appreciate the kind introduction. There's probably a lot of people who would disagree with the scholar part of the introduction, but we'll leave it at that in the past. But it's really nice to be with you all today. Greetings from the EDP&C offices here in downtown Raleigh. Some of you know that we made a change of address back earlier this year in late January, moving from our longtime home in Cary off of Weston Parkway to the 12th floor here in the Wells Fargo building, just a stone's throw away from the governor's office, the legislature, and of course, our partners at Commerce. We were all excited to move here into this space. It was something the governor, the legislature, Commerce, and a lot of our investors wanted to see happen, and our staff really loved it in those opening weeks before COVID came along. Suffice it to say, we cannot wait for the day when we're able to welcome all of you, our partners and our friends here to join us in our new digs. We hope that's not too long into the future. So again, we look forward to that. But again, it's nice to be with you all today. I've got the typical update on what we've seen so far in terms of EDPNC this year, in terms of our performance, but I wanted to couch it in a little bit of a different way. We're now entering and almost at the end of 6 months in this new normal that we're all living through. And I suspect I'm not the only one to have a few days here and there where it's just been a serious realization and somewhat discouraging to realize that we're 6 months into this and we probably still have yet some time to go before we can finish this chapter of life on this planet here and get onto whatever that new normal looks like after COVID-19 is passed. And so for me anyway, and I think for a lot of, hopefully for all of you, these past 6 months have not only, of course, included some of those days about thinking, well, gosh, how much longer do we have to balance this new normal, to worry about our health, the health of the people that we care about the economic circumstances that we find ourselves trying to address head on. Not only, of course, having those days where we realize that we've still got some ways to go, but more importantly, thinking about what it is that we ought to be thankful for. That's something that's helped me get through the past 6 months, is to take stock of all the things that either at a professional or personal level that I can count my blessings for. And so it was in that vein, as I was putting together my presentation for today, that I thought I'd provide the usual updates and statistics, but couch it in the vein of what is it that EDPNC is thankful and grateful for as we end the 6th month of this new reality that hit us back in March. And so you'll see that theme, of course, throughout the presentations. It really doesn't change the numbers that I'll be sharing with you about how we've performed and what the pipeline looks like. But I hope you'll understand that it's delivered in the spirit of the gratitude that we have for the ability to tackle our mission, to do our important work on the state's behalf, to work with all of you as our partners and our colleagues to get that mission done. That gratitude is something that we hopefully never would have taken for granted before March, but is certainly something that we don't take for granted in these past 6 months. And so with that, I'll ask whoever's got this presentation teed up if we could jump ahead a couple slides into the deck that I sent out. I'll give the audiovisual folks a couple seconds to do that. And like I said, we're sitting here in the office right now. If you see a few folks behind me, we are a bit of a skeleton crew. Operating here in the office. We accommodate about 55 folks in this office on any given day. You'll maybe find anywhere from half a dozen to a dozen of us on probably the most crowded days. I'm in here myself a couple of days throughout the week, but we've got our masks. We've got our hand sanitizer, this one courtesy of Chris Platte in Monroe, Union County. It's a great giveaway that was relevant before COVID-19. I suspect these will fly off the shelf as soon as we go back to trade shows. So if we could jump ahead to the first slide here. What I want to do, like I said, first off, it goes without saying, these past 6 months have been hard on everybody, and that's just as true for the folks who make up the team at the EDPNC. Whether these are folks who are working on our tourism promotion, whether they are business recruiters, whether the existing industry team, our international trade staff, our small business counseling team, and of course the support personnel in our marketing, research, finance, administration arms. It has not been an easy environment, of course. Many of these folks are balancing the new realities involving school, childcare, work, and really, at the end of the day, this organization doesn't have tangible products. We are a function. Our success is a function of our people. So the 65 people who make up the EDPNC team here in North Carolina, really thankful and extremely proud of how they've continued to stay motivated, stay engaged, and contribute to our organizational mission. That team is hopefully going to grow a couple more faces here in the next few weeks. We're in the home stretch of filling a couple of key roles on the business recruitment team. As you all know, back in June and July, we promoted longtime business recruiters Melissa Smith and Garrett Wyckoff to new management and leadership roles. Melissa especially, she's a VP of Business Recruitment, part of our senior management team here at the EDPNC, but that left a couple of important vacancies on our business recruitment team. And we're really eager to get those positions filled. So we're in the home stretch of those interview processes. We hope to have those candidates on board and ready to begin working with all of you, albeit virtually, in September. It's going to be a really interesting time to onboard people in a field like economic development. I was thinking this morning, economic development is such a handshake business, at least here in the United States. And the fact that I haven't shaken anyone's hand in 6 months is just something I never would have expected to encounter at any point in 23 years of being in economic development. But as I said, we're going to do our best to onboard those new business recruiters in a business development role as soon as we bring them on board, hopefully sometime here within the next few weeks. I'm also looking forward to introducing you all longer term to our new Vice President of Marketing and Research, Denise Desatnik. Denise joined us just a little over 3 weeks ago. Really excited about her taking the reins on a lot of our business marketing initiatives designed to increase awareness of North Carolina as a business location, but also drive greater awareness of the different services that we offer to existing North Carolina firms. So again, look to hear from her. She's already on deck to become an NCEDA member if she's not already, but really excited about the background and expertise that she brings from the marketing, advertising, and place promotion world to the important role that she's entrusted with, also part of our senior management team. Our board of directors, I can never say enough about this group of individuals drawn from all over the state. They, like many nonprofit board of directors, we are a nonprofit after all, 501c3, they have had to and will continue to have to make some hard choices around how we allocate our resources as an organization as we enter month 7, month 8, month 9, however long this continues to drag on. We know that that's going to result in some difficult decisions to make about how best to allocate the organization's resources. And the fact that we've got such a professional, supportive, bipartisan, and I would say nonpartisan board of directors appointed by the governor and the legislature, and of course, including Secretary Copeland ex officio, we're tremendously grateful for the support and guidance we continue to get from our board of directors. And of course, last but not least, a shout out to all of the current and prospective investors who make the work of the EDPNC possible. Many of you know our model as a public-private partnership was premised on raising dollars and support from the private sector. Many of those companies, like Duke Energy, who's sponsoring this session right now, they have continued to stand by our side through a pretty challenging past couple of years. We obviously went through a very lengthy, exhaustive legislative audit a couple of years ago. We went through some back and forth around the contract renewal between us and the state. And of course, now COVID-19. At any point, any of these financial supporters of EDPNC would have had a very easy, convenient excuse to say, thanks, but we're going to take a pass on supporting your efforts. The fact that so many of these dozens of investors have stood by our side, including over the past 6 months in COVID-19, it's something we cannot be thankful enough for. Next slide, please. Let me touch on how we're doing so far in terms of performance year to date. So this is through 10 a.m. this morning when I ran these statistics. So far, we're sitting at 81 recruitment and expansion wins. Now that's done, of course, both by our recruitment team as well as our existing industry expansions group. But 81 wins so far this year, everywhere from Cabarrus to Cumberland, Randolph to Rockingham, and Bladen to Burke counties, all across the state in lots of different industry sectors. And of course, each of those 81 wins cannot be done without a team approach. That team involves the governor, Secretary Copeland, the legislature, all of you at the local level, many of our private sector allies and regional economic development groups. It is a team approach that enables any state, especially North Carolina, to secure those wins. But 81 wins across the state, resulting in more than 11,400 announced new jobs. You heard Secretary Copeland talk about it a little while ago in terms of how well we're pacing in terms of capital investment. That's also a key metric and performance target for us at EDPNC. We're actually sitting at about $3.5 billion of announced new capital investment as a result of those 81 wins so far year to date. Most importantly for us, we're staying within striking distance of very aggressive performance targets that we had set at the beginning of 2020, long before we ever even knew what the coronavirus was. Like many organizations, when we set our goals, we look at a rolling average of the past 3 years, and the past 3 years have been, thanks to the teamwork of all of you, have been enormously successful for North Carolina on the job recruitment and job expansion front. We've had a lot of great wins in 17, 18, 19, and what that meant was even more aggressive targets for 2020. The result is right now we're sitting at anywhere from 75 to 85% of where we ought to be at this point in the year in terms of wins in tier 1 and tier 2 counties, and in terms of jobs announced. Now, I'd love to be at 100%, but we had a little thing called COVID-19 6 months ago disrupt a lot of the great momentum that you heard Secretary Copeland talk about as we began 2020. But yet we sit at roughly 80% of where we need and ought to be at this point in the year. And we're actually even outperforming 2019 when it comes to capital investment that's been announced year to date. Those are things we are tremendously thankful for, especially given the climate that all of us have been doing this work in over the past 6 months. Next slide, please. We're also thankful for a pipeline that allows us to continue competing for the right to earn the business of 167 companies that are looking at North Carolina for either a new location or an expansion of their existing operation. Again, in normal times, let alone in these types of circumstances, we will never take for granted the chance that we get to compete for the right to get these companies to invest further and create jobs right here in North Carolina. 167 deals sitting in that pipeline as of 10 a.m. this morning, representing 33,000 new jobs and $7.3 billion in new investment. We're extremely grateful that we still get up every day, our recruitment and expansion teams, and go out and compete for that pipeline of deals sitting right now. You see the chart to your right, that just shows a month by month counting of the number of new projects that have come in through the door, either recruitment or expansion projects, the number of new deals coming in through the door. And you can see that we're actually in July and August of 2020, actually doing as well as we were a year ago at this time. And that's after March, April, and May were all significantly below the same count in 2019. So all of these are encouraging signs, again, that we're very thankful for. Next slide. Our existing industry team, of course, part of their performance is measured in terms of the expansion projects that they help contribute to the winning of, but they're also responsible for reaching out to companies and helping support them, even if that doesn't entail an actual job creation or investment projects. And so far this year, they've already connected with 800 unique businesses in each of those 8 regions across the state to provide whatever help can be provided to allow these companies to overcome growth barriers and pain points that they're experiencing. Now, of course, that work looked very different in the first 3 months of the year compared to the last 6 months of the year. In the last 6 months, our existing industry team has been spending a lot of time with existing employers, often in partnership with each of you at the local level, helping companies first navigate essential versus non-essential status. And of course, helping some companies make that pivot to PPE, like we heard about from Carly Beege earlier in the session this morning. And of course, in recent days, to helping more and more employers figure out how to reopen safely for workers and for customers alike. That existing industry team, I cannot say enough about the job that they've been doing in truly trying circumstances. Next slide, please. International trade. We are very thankful that the U.S. Small Business Administration continues to invest significantly in the STEP program. That's the federal funding program that we utilize to help more and more small and medium-sized North Carolina companies to grow globally, to increase their export customer sales overseas. The U.S. Small Business Administration has been very generous to North Carolina in our efforts to fund export assistance since EDPNC started 6 years ago. We're eagerly optimistic about whether or not we're going to secure even more of those dollars in the coming months for the next round of funding. The nice thing is they've allowed us to be even more flexible in how we utilize the grant funds we've received to date. We're going to be rolling over about $400,000 in funds from the current federal grant year into the next federal grant year on top of whatever new we receive in addition. Those dollars are helping, again, small, medium-sized North Carolina companies, often in the manufacturing sector, to connect with and sell to more customers around the world. And that's something we're very thankful for. Those dollars are more flexibly able to be deployed given the circumstances we're dealing with right now. So website localization for international markets, virtual trade show exhibitions. So much of our export assistance work involves personal selling and helping these companies travel overseas and attend major industry trade shows so they can connect with future customers. Well, of course, all of that has been put on pause. So what are other ways we can leverage these federal dollars to help our North Carolina companies grow globally around the world? again, very thankful for the resources we continue to receive from the federal government for this purpose. Next slide, please. Small business counseling. Again, we have been very fortunate to hear from and be able to assist more than 12,600 truly courageous entrepreneurs who are looking to launch a new business in North Carolina. It could be a food truck, it could be a cleaning service. Both of those have been very common types of requests in these past 6 months. They make a lot of sense given the new environment when you think about it. But whatever business they're starting, 12,600 people who are willing to put their personal bank accounts on the line to start a business, even in this unprecedented climate that we're all living through right now. We're truly grateful that they've reached out to us and that we have been able in turn to help assist and counsel them on those first couple of steps in getting a new business open and going here in North Carolina. Next slide, please. Tourism. It is no surprise that tourism has borne the economic brunt of COVID-19. Many of you who live in tourism-dependent communities, you have seen this firsthand, just how decimated our hotels, our restaurants, and other retail and tourist attractions who depend on visitors coming in from outside the community. While things have picked up a little bit in the summer months, especially around house rentals and Airbnb type occupancies, our hotels and motels are still seeing tremendously low occupancy rates. That's hurting the ability of local tourism entities to fund their marketing dollars through occupancy tax revenues. We're very grateful that the governor and the legislature signed into law over the past couple months, $16.5 million of one-time funding specifically designed to help EDPNC and our Visit North Carolina tourism arm do safety messaging designed to facilitate the recovery of greater tourism and visitation. People will not travel again as much as they used to unless they can be comforted and reassured on the safety of the experience. And these marketing funds will allow us to tell the story, including initiatives like Count on Me NC, which our tourism team worked on. It's a seal of approval that tells you that that business is following best practices for customer and worker safety. Initiatives like this are things that we want the traveling public to be more aware of so that they're more comfortable to travel, to visit these places, and to spend the money that our tourism industry so depends on. Next slide, please. Again, in closing, we're thankful for our mission. We know the EDPNC, we're celebrating our 6th birthday here in about 6 or 7 weeks. We know that it's still a pretty young organization, and especially in times like COVID-19, we are extremely grateful for the mission that we are entrusted with by the state of North Carolina. We don't take that lightly. We don't take for granted the things that we get up every day and be able to do for our fellow citizens and our neighbors and the residents of North Carolina. We're just really glad that we can approach this mission arms in arms with all of you, the Department of Commerce and other partners, to help improve the economic well-being and quality of life for everyone who calls North Carolina home. Next slide, please. And of course, goes without saying, like every speaker, we also want to just thank NCEDA. My wife does association management, so I hear from her how hard it is to run an association in this virtual era that we're all living through. So tip of the hat to Liz and to Lawrence and their board of directors for NCEDA for putting together this virtual conference. We appreciate the ongoing partnership that we have with each of you. And like I said, we cannot wait for that day when we can see all of you in person. The photos during the intermission, they reminded me just how much NCEDA's membership really is one big family. And even though we haven't been able to have anything in the way of a true family reunion, we know that's just a matter of when and not if, and we all look forward to that day as well. Let me close up, since I know we're getting ready to segue into a profile on leadership. I'm really excited to hear from Janet Labar. I think she's been a great addition to North Carolina's economic development family. I think as leaders, each of us, whether you're leading a local organization, a regional group, a private sector firm, or a state entity, each of us as leaders need to do the same thing as I just talked about, which is to take stock of the things that we're thankful for and that we count our blessings for. And so you could skip ahead to the next slide, please. The things that I'm thankful for, to wrap up maybe with a bit of a moment of levity before we move on to the next session. Next slide. As Lawrence was kind enough to say, we welcomed our little daughter almost 9 months ago. She turns 9 months old tomorrow. And so this was snapped a couple of days ago. So much less travel in my life over the past 6 months. While I miss seeing all of you in person, and I certainly miss aspects of the traveling life that I used to have, the silver lining, the blessings that I count for sure, are much more time to see her grow up than I ever would have had under the old normal. Now, that'll change someday, but I'm cherishing every day in this new normal that we have. I've also been able to brush up on some cooking. It's not something I ever did. Many of you who travel a lot, it's the last thing you want to do is put together a meal when you've come back from a long day of travel in state, overseas, or around the country. And that's something I've been able to spend a lot more time on, given the many more evenings and weekends that I'm in town. And of course, I've even picked up ukulele strumming. No one's ever going to confuse my musical talents for those of Robert Van Gien's, but it is something that I never thought I would find myself doing. That is a pink ukulele. It is something that was designed to be given to our daughter later on, but it's something I've co-opted in the meanwhile because, hey, we all need to pick up some new hobbies while we're all sitting here at home. So those are some of the things that I'm thankful for, in addition to all the things I talked about on a professional level. I hope you all have things that you can look back on over these past 6 months and take stock in and count your blessings for, because it's that kind of mental encouragement that we're all going to need to get through these next several months until this is all behind us. So again, thank you so much for the chance to give an update on where EDPNC is right now and what we're seeing. Good luck with the rest of the virtual conference. Again, thank you all so much for each of your all's support and partnership.
Thank you, Chris. You are always spot on with your remarks and deliver such critical updates to our membership. We appreciate EDPNC's partnership with us. Again, if you have questions for any of our speakers, please submit those. If we don't have a chance to ask them in person, we are again going to keep track of those and get those to the speakers and get those responses back to you. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Janet Labar, President and CEO of the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance.
Thank you, John, for that introduction. And it's great to be with all of you this morning. Always tough to follow Chris, but I really appreciate the warmth and the leadership and the expertise that he brings to his position, to EDPNC. And we are all lucky in the economic development community and the tourism community to be part of his leadership and watch him do his thing. So, and Chris, hard to believe already that your daughter is 9 months. Time just flies, but so glad that you're using the pandemic to really soak it all up and soak it in. So thanks again for having me here today. I'm going to give you a quick update on what we're up to in the Charlotte region and a little bit of an entree into what the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance is. It's hard to believe I've been here now a year and some change, and I'm now just getting in front of y'all. I apologize for that, and I know that the pandemic didn't help in terms of us being able to convene sooner. But who we are, we are the result of the merger of the Charlotte Chamber, which served the city of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County, and then the Charlotte Regional Partnership, which many of you probably know was responsible for the regional recruitment in the Charlotte market. And I got here last April. And so, thinking that 2020 would be our full year as a complete and whole organization to really strut our stuff, and pandemic has arrived. So we're doing what we can to get our message out about who we are and what we do. But we are the voice of business for the Charlotte region. We help the region to grow, and we focus on a strong economy where both businesses and people can thrive. We have a foundation arm that's part of us, who's really focused on making sure that our mission of prosperity for all gets down on the ground and impacts the people across our region. They're focused on inclusive economic growth and fostering more economic development, economic growth, and advancement for all in our regional community. How we do this work is still really manifested from what was the Legacy Chamber and Legacy Regional Partnership. It's through still marketing the region and putting the Charlotte market out there on the world stage to tell our story about why Charlotte and the surrounding region are a great place to do business. We follow that up with business recruitment, much as EDPNC and Chris's team do. We focus on attraction of new companies, new investment into the market. And then on the other side of the shop, I like to think about it as product improvement. If the region is our product, then where are those areas that we should be focused on to make sure that we're addressing any shortfalls or gaps? And that's really around advocacy, and so ensuring that our business climate is one in which existing companies and companies new to the market can succeed and thrive here. And then it's in talent. We know that that's a driving factor for many companies and what they're seeking in terms of that next location to grow in. And they want to make sure that the workforce is here, skilled, educated, and ready. And so being at that intersection of hearing what companies are looking for and needing as they're scouting out a potential location investment, and then talking to our higher education partners, our workforce development providers, and understanding what they're doing to really ensure that the pipeline is skilled and ready is a really great intersection to be at. And so through our talent insights, through our advocacy, again, marketing and business, we're trying to realize better how our organization can help grow this region. And all of that really gets rooted in research. We're really emphasizing and making sure that all of our strategies are based on data, data-driven analysis. We have a fantastic team, and I'm actually going to highlight some of the work that they've done in these next slides around our what's happened in terms of economic growth in the last quarter. And why our role and value as the Alliance is unique is because we are a regional public-private partnership. My background is in 18 years of regional economic development, most recently in Portland, Oregon, the bi-state region of Oregon and Washington there, where I was CEO for about 5 years, and then 12 years before that, where I spent time in Phoenix, the Greater Phoenix Economic Council. So I really value and understand the importance of a regional public-private partnership, and proud that we are continuing that at the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance. We are setting the table where decision makers and influencers can come together and tackle some of these big issues that perhaps no one company or no one entity can do on its own. I mentioned the research, the proprietary and original research that our team is producing, delivering that critical voice of business. Again, I think that's really important for the Alliance to have a strong business lens on the work that we do. In the Charlotte market, I'm sure many of you are familiar, but business has led a lot in a lot of ways in creating the vibrancy and the innovation that's occurring through some of our traded sector industries there. So making sure that we're representing the voice of business, especially in the advocacy arena, is important. And then finally, with the foundation, just leveraging the power of philanthropy to do good and ensure that our overall region's economic health is strong and vibrant. All right, next slide, please. I'll talk about the snapshot just quickly about our response to COVID. And as I mentioned, we felt strongly that 2020 was going to be our year to really come out strong with letting people know who we are and what we've done after going through a couple of years of a merger, and then waiting a little bit before I arrived here to really roll out what the Alliance is going to do. And so since the pandemic, as NCEDA and others have, all of you out there, we've really had to adjust and make sure that we're still trying to deliver value to our investors and the private and public sectors who make our work possible. And so we've done that in a variety of ways, whether that's, offerings like this, where you're bringing some subject matter experts to share what they're doing. In this case, this was the commercial real estate industry in the top left of your screen, having a conversation on what does returning to work look like. Right below that, you see a graphic of our COVID-19 economic impact. Our research team formed a research collaborative where they're actually tracking regularly impacts of the pandemic to some of our local industries, hospitality, workforce, unemployment, and that is available on our website. So it's a great resource for you if you ever need a snapshot of research of what's going on in the Charlotte region. We've moved to podcasts, trying to feature some of the investors again and some of the companies and frankly community partners who are doing great work to share and spread the good news. It's really easy in this pandemic environment to get bogged down with a lot of heavy stuff. And so trying to shine a light on all the bright stuff that's happening is one we've been happy to do through our podcasts. And then the graphic below that is really around our Talent Insights quarterly report. Again, I mentioned being at that intersection of understanding from companies their talent needs and trying to marry that with talent demands from our educational provider, workforce development provider side. We're producing reports, or actually our Q2 report on Talent Insights is coming out, I think, in the very near future, in the next week or two. So, you know, we've tried to pivot and do what we can virtually. I know in the pandemic environment, we didn't get out and travel. Obviously, we limited that. We are now seeing an uptick in activity. It was great to hear Chris share some of what the data seeing in their pipeline. And so we're actually really hopeful that before this year ends, we'll be able to ink out 2 or 3 more sales missions and get back on the road to make sure we're positioning the Charlotte region for investment. Next slide, please. Okay, so quickly in the second quarter, probably like most, we saw the worst quarter in our region's history in terms of job loss. So there was a lot of uncertainty in the market. However, we did see some signs of confidence in the long-term future of the region. We lost 156,000 jobs quarter over quarter. There were about 40% of those in leisure and hospitality industry. Chris mentioned the tourism campaign, and I think it's really important on many of us to make sure that we're going out and trying to still support local businesses. Having that stamp of approval is really helpful in knowing that they too are following the protocols that are out there to keep us all safe. You know, the good news is that many of the job losses were temporary, and in fact, we started to see some of those jobs coming back in June and July, with unemployment landing at 8.4%. You know, there were traded sector industry announcements occurring, and that again is a promising sign for long-term investments in the region. Those were spread well throughout, and I'll have another slide here momentarily to show you where that spread of wins and announcements were made all across the Charlotte region. Those totaled about $1.1 billion of investment, and that was in fact led by the Carolina Panthers relocation project in York County and Charlotte Pipe and Foundry's long planned move over to Stanley County. Next slide, please. Okay, this one's a little bit harder to see here, but I mentioned that 40% drop in leisure and hospitality jobs. And on the right-hand side, you see that uptick. You know, in our region, manufacturing has actually struggled a bit for 2 reasons. First, there's a slowdown in transportation equipment orders that led to a decline in the volume. This is slowly returning as the Carolinas automotive sector starts coming back fully. And secondly, some traditional manufacturers in the textile and furniture industry have closed. At the same time, we saw many of them innovate their ways through this, and respond to producing PPE, which was a fantastic way to give back to the community and keep those employees in these manufacturing companies employed and still providing for their families. You know, I'm hearing from logistics companies that automotive companies in South Carolina are starting to pick up again, which should help some of our North Carolina suppliers as well. Next slide. All right, again, a little bit hard to read, but what I want to point to is the bar graph on the right here. What has been the bright spot for us in the Charlotte region is finance and insurance industries. That was the only sector to add jobs in the second quarter, although we just know that the recent announcement of Wells Fargo layoffs might put a damper on this moving forward. Lower interest rates have led to increasing growth in credit intermediation, and the fintech sector has also benefited here. This includes internal fintech initiatives in the larger banks, but also within mid-market companies. Particularly in the payments industry, companies like AvidXchange have seen a big uptick in business as mid-market companies move to automate their antiquated paper-based systems. Charlotte is certainly poised to benefit from this trend. Next slide, please. All right, and as I mentioned, this is the spread of some of those announcements. 10 of the 15 counties and the city of Charlotte, in which the Charlotte region serves, saw growth, saw some terrific announcements, and a lot of these were in manufacturing, in industrial sectors. We saw a lot of food. I think we're actually seeing in our pipeline now too, a lot of food processing, manufacturing related to food. So that should be an interesting tell. I believe that's related obviously to the pandemic and the need for global supply chains to get a little closer to home. And so we expect to see some continued interest and growth in that. Our team is proactively looking out for those sectors So, this is again, second quarter. We had a huge announcement with Centene at the top of July. We'll see that in the next quarterly growth report, but that was significant as a terrific win, again, led by the Department of Commerce and EDPNC, City of Charlotte, and Mecklenburg County. But you'll see that next time you invite me back. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, and that's it for me. So I actually whizzed through that. I know that we were running behind on time, but I want to thank you again. And I wish I had done a little more prep in terms of what Chris has done and what he was thankful for. I appreciated hearing from that. I will tell you just quickly, it's been a wonderful entree for me into the Charlotte market. I grew up in the Panhandle of Florida, and so coming back to the Southeast after being out on the West Coast for the last 17 years was a welcome return. Still have family nearby in Asheville and in Atlanta, and my parents are still in Florida. And so for me to be able to do this work in terms of building and shaping communities and economies that work for everybody means a lot to me. And I have found that the Charlotte region and the Carolinas has been exactly where I need to be doing this work. So I want to thank NCEDA again for having me here. We appreciate our partnership with you and look forward to doing more good things and making sure that we rebound from this economy ahead of other markets. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Janet. We are so happy to have you in North Carolina, and you are an asset to the Charlotte region. Our next segment is sponsored by North Carolina Electric Cooperatives. NCDA is proud to call NCMC a partner. It's now my pleasure to welcome my fellow board member, Dr. Pat Mitchell, NCDA's immediate past president, who will introduce our next speaker.
Good morning. So glad to be with you all. It is a delight to be able to introduce Scott Hamilton. He probably doesn't need an introduction to many in this group. He's a past president of the organization. He is the president and CEO of Golden Leaf. He's the former executive director of the Regional Commission, Appalachian Regional Commission, and a lot of local development previous to that. But one other thing that Scott Hamilton is that many in this organization will agree is the mentor that he has been to many of us and the support that he gives as he is mentoring you. He encourages you to do things, and then he stands by your side and helps you get them accomplished. And many in this organization would agree with that statement about Scott. Scott, we're delighted to have you back in North Carolina. Glad you're with us today. So tell us what you have to say.
Great. Thank you, ma'am. How are you? I want to thank the NCEDA board for the invitation and the management team there for helping coordinate this and get this all set up. Again, just hello to everybody. It's still morning, so good morning. I look forward to providing an update to you. For some of you that may not know Golden Leaf was established in 1999 by the 1998 Master Settlement Agreement with tobacco companies. North Carolina established the Golden Leaf Foundation to provide long-term economic advancement for North Carolina's tobacco-dependent communities, rural communities, and distressed communities across the state. We are governed by a 15-member board of directors that is appointed by the governor, the president of the Senate, and the Speaker of the House. Our board meets every other month, and I'm pleased to say that our board has maintained a commitment to our funding levels during this pandemic and has not reduced our funding as we moved into our new fiscal year starting in July for the programs that we support in moving Golden Leaf forward through the advancement of the economy across the state. Many of you know that LEAF in our name is an acronym, and LEAF stands for Long-Term Economic Advancement Foundation. And that's what the board is focused on through our programs, looking at projects that lead to direct and clear job development. We continue to have our open grants projects that we fund. As the name suggests, there's not a timeline. You can apply for those throughout the year. As mentioned, the board meets every other month on even numbered months and will consider letters of interest and inquiry at each of those and invite full applications based off of the LOIs that are submitted. Those projects focus in on our priority areas. Our priority areas include economic investment and job creation. They include workforce preparedness, agriculture and agribusiness projects, and community vitality that centers around infrastructure. When the board is looking at projects centered in the open grants category, they're looking at what are the strategies to move an economy forward, to move the community forward. Their questions are, how does this project move the economic needle in that community or region? So they look very hard and very close at those types of projects. They also like to see how is the project going to be sustainable once the Golden Leaf funds are clearly deployed, and how is that project going to continue to go on and be viable after Golden Leaf funding has been expended. Another project or program that we have is our Economic Catalyst Program. The Economic Catalyst Program is a responsive program to communities or for communities that have active economic development projects. The dollar amount on this is varies by the number of jobs and the types of the number of jobs, the amount of the investment, and the impact that that project will have in the community. That is a little bit different. That's a direct application. There's no letter of inquiry associated with that. We work very closely with the North Carolina Department of Commerce. We'll work very closely with the EDP-NC on all project activity and try to help out where we can fill the gaps to be sure that North Carolina is successful in job retention and job recruitment. Program that was started several years ago is our Community-Based Grants Initiative. Community-Based Grants Initiative moves across the state and focuses in each year on a specific prosperity zone. Recently, we just wrapped up the Sandhills Prosperity Zone projects this past April. And this past February, we kicked off the Northwest Prosperity Zone Community-Based Grants Initiative. Next year, we're looking at doing the Western Prosperity Zone. Letters of intent will be due this fall for the Northwest Prosperity Zone. And we anticipate the board taking action on the projects that are submitted through the Northwest Prosperity Zone CBGI program at the April board meeting. Every so often, the board will look at special initiatives. In this past year, we had a special initiative focused on workforce development and workforce preparedness for folks that were facing barriers to employment. The GLOW initiative, or the Golden Leaf Opportunity for Workers, was set up to address the specific need, obviously previously to the pandemic, but for those that were wanting to work but faced a barrier, long-term unemployment, those that had left or had come out of treatment and into recovery, and those that had been previously incarcerated face employment or face barriers to their employment, and workforce needs are workforce training helps them find that available employment. Looking at all of those sectors, it is very well demonstrated that once a person has a job, they are less likely to have recidivism of either going back into addiction or into incarceration. So the board looked at that and approved about $3.5 million worth of projects that focus specifically on those folks that continue to need to work but face a barrier to employment. Even with the pandemic and the higher unemployment rate numbers we have heard earlier today about the need for skilled workforce. So although the pandemic has changed the level of the unemployment rate, the need for skilled workers remains critical. And this is one way Golden Leaf is trying to work towards filling that skills gap. Speaking of the pandemic, in March, as pandemic started landing on the shores of the United States in February and early March, the Golden Leaf we started talking with partners at the North Carolina Rural Center about what we could do to help small businesses address their urgent need for cash. In March, the board approved $15 million in funding for the Rural Center to be able to stand up the North Carolina Rapid Recovery Loan Program. Then about 48 hours of us standing up that with the North Carolina Rural Center, applications far exceeded the availability of funds. Conversations with the governor's office and members of the General Assembly began, and the North Carolina General Assembly passed legislation, and the governor on May 3rd signed legislation appropriating $125 million to Golden Leaf to recapitalize the North Carolina Rapid Recovery Loan Program. Applications are still being taken. As early loans were provided and are being paid off, funds are put back into the Rapid Recovery Loan Program so they can be redeployed. The take rate, interestingly, although we've had over 8,000 applications for the program, the take rate has been lower than expected. But as we sit back and we were thinking about this in March and April, the conventional wisdom was pandemic didn't like heat and it didn't like humidity, and we would be closer to normalcy than where we are today. The Rapid Recovery Loan Program is debt. It is a loan. It is expected to be repaid. So as some small businesses were looking for help and relief, they were applying for whatever was available, and very understandably. But for all, a loan is not going to be what is going to be best for them, and so they have chosen not to follow through. They may have received other funding as they applied for the Rapid Recovery Loan Program, SBA, the Payroll Protection Act, and a number of other programs that were out there along with conventional financing may have been come through to them before getting their loan underwritten through the North Carolina Rapid Recovery Loan Program. And then sadly, some businesses are probably out of business that had applied for it and no longer needed the funds. However, we are still accepting applications. Information regarding the North Carolina Rapid Recovery Loan Program can be found at ncrapidrecovery.org. It's ncrapidrecovery.org. Information about the program, what small businesses are going to need for underwriting, and the application link is on that site as well. When the General Assembly approved the dollars for the Rapid Recovery Loan Program, they authorized some money to be available for technical assistance. So the Rural Center has been working with agencies across North Carolina to help provide technical assistance to those small businesses so they can be prepared when their application comes up for underwriting. They will have all the information ready to go so they can get to a closing faster. One of the newest developments for Golden Leaf is the development of a long-range strategic plan, something Golden Leaf has not had for a while. The board is very excited about entering into the development of a long-term strategic plan. We have just kicked this off recently, and shortly we will be sending out surveys to the membership of NCEDA, asking some questions and gathering your thoughts and input regarding the development of that strategic plan. We've engaged Ted Abernathy and Crystal Morphus to help us with this. And we look forward to hearing from you about your inputs and insight into what a new long-term strategic plan could look like for Golden Leaf. I will say that Golden Leaf, the board, is not looking to change the mission. Our mission is in our name, Long-Term Economic Advancement Foundation. I think what the board is interested in is learning about how we can be more impactful, how we can be more effective and efficient with the dollars we deploy to achieve the goal of long-term economic advancement. So we look forward to hearing from you with your input regarding your insights and thoughts on that. Again, it is great to be back in North Carolina. It is great to re-engage with the North Carolina Economic Developers Association. Very pleased that I was invited to provide a Golden Leaf update to you this morning. And I look forward to continuing to interact with each of you and look forward to the day when we're actually together as opposed to virtually being together. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Scott. We are certainly lucky to have you back in North Carolina and at the helm of Golden Leaf. We do have a minute for a question, and we do have one from Mary Lily. Can you please mention the need to everyone, especially rural counties, to complete their census documents? NC's completion rate is 58%. The US completion rate is 63.9.
Well, I think you did a great job in announcing that, and I think it is very important with all of the federal dollars that are calculated for North Carolina. It is all based off of the census. The census is critical for the advancement of rural North Carolina, and the advancement of rural North Carolina is going to help all of North Carolina. We're not separate entities. We are not separate parts of the economy. Metro and rural North Carolina are critically linked together and both depend on each other to be successful. So completing the census is critical for us to achieve that.
Thanks again for being with us, Scott.
Thank you.
Our next segment is sponsored by 365 Degree Total Marketing. This company has been a great partner to NCDA and designs the logos for all our conferences. Thank you, 365 Degree Total Marketing. I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Maria Farr, President of South Piedmont Community College, who will give us an update on workforce development.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciated hearing from everybody. I am grateful to NCEDA for asking me to be here and for the sponsor of this segment, 365 Degree Total Marketing. So over the past few months, the world has changed. And during times like this, we are forced to consider our future in new ways. Now, the world has faced significant challenges that have caused transformational change. We've been through war, depressions, plagues, devastating natural events. Of course, we're experiencing that right now. But we have shown over time that we're resilient, innovative, and determined to move forward despite the challenge. And educational systems are no different. We have to adapt so that we can teach contemporary learners in a contemporary world. So today I want to talk with you about how educational systems in North Carolina are stepping up to meet the challenges of tomorrow. Now, we cannot accurately predict what the world will look like when the pandemic actually ebbs and the nation starts to rebuild its economy, but there is little doubt that the economy is going to be different. Even before the pandemic, we were experiencing a shift as technology increased and consumer habits changed, but COVID hastened and even transformed our need for and our use of technology. And it created that dichotomy of essential and non-essential workers. But as we look forward, we know that things will be different. We're entering an economic landscape that has changed significantly. And to recover, we must be nimble, flexible, and attuned to the workforce and economic needs of our changed world. Well, community colleges are poised to meet the challenge of economic recovery and training the future workforce. The very essence of our mission is to advance students' social and economic mobility, and we have the reach, the scale, the agility, and the infrastructure to provide that relevant job-focused training. However, we must reimagine the current system of program delivery, student support, and workforce preparation to ensure that our educational attainment efforts align directly with North Carolina's emerging talent needs and industry trends. But even before the pandemic, half of North Carolina's employers were not finding the skilled workers they needed. And the reasons for that are very complex, but we do know that 67% of North Carolina jobs require a high quality credential or post-secondary degree. Yet only 49% of North Carolinians between the ages of 25 and 44 have a post-secondary credential of value. And of course, North Carolinians from economically disadvantaged backgrounds are disproportionately affected. In our current economy, we know that educational attainment is the path to short-term recovery and the long-term resiliency of North Carolina's economy. So it's important that we set an audacious goal to create the workforce that North Carolina's employers need. Now, if you see here, there's a My Future NC goal, and the work needed to set this goal began back in 2017, when thought leaders from the K-12 system, the community college system, and the university system, along with business, civic, governmental, and philanthropic groups, began working together to establish a path forward to more than double the projected growth of skilled workers in the state by 2030. The statewide nonprofit organization My Future NC is the framework that's endorsed by our educational systems, and our goal is to ensure that 2 million North Carolinians will have a post-secondary credential of value by 2030. But you can also notice from this slide that if our current pace of credential attainment continues on its trajectory, by 2030, we're going to fall short of that goal. So considering our current condition, projecting our thoughts towards 2030, what do educational systems have to do to ensure that we reach the My Future NC auspicious and critical goal that's going to create that stronger, economically competitive, and prosperous North Carolina with opportunity for all? Well, we must ensure that our educational attainment efforts align directly with North Carolina's talent needs and industry trends. We must be nimble, creative, and open to strengthening our ability to deliver education in flexible, high quality, and engaging ways that meet the needs of all of our students. We must find ways to collaborate to achieve shared goals. And we must ensure that we identify and break down the organizational, process, and policy barriers that limit that student access, equitable outcomes, and workforce alignment. North Carolina community colleges have adopted an integrated and institution-wide approach to student success, and we call it guided pathways. This model is based on intentionally designed, clear, coherent, and very structured educational experiences that guide each student effectively and efficiently from his or her point of entry through attainment of high-quality post-secondary credentials in careers with value in the labor market. The college provides students with course sequences, program milestones, and program learning outcomes aligned to what students must know and be able to do in the workforce. Most colleges in the North Carolina community college system have already implemented or are in the process of implementing this approach. And it takes about 5 years to see the trends once this system is implemented. But we've looked at early adopters from across the United States, and they're already seeing promising results. Success indicators such as the percentage of students graduating in 3 years and the percentage of students earning at least 6 college-level credits on their pathway in their first year has grown by double digits. But we must provide roadmaps for our students that incorporate what they already have learned into stackable credentials that reward their progressive learning throughout their college and career journey. And in 2019, the North Carolina Community College System drafted a credit for prior learning policy and procedures manual to align the efforts across all 58 community colleges. And we now have established pathways to award credit for industry recognized credentials, continuing education programs, military training, and other work-based learning experiences. And what we've quickly recognized over the past few months is that we must provide these programs to meet the needs of the contemporary student. Our programs and our services must be designed for disruption. We have multiple and flexible ways to train, educate, and serve our students and other stakeholders, and we must engage our students in technology that is reliable, adaptable, and effective. And our schedules need to accommodate adults who need to work and learn simultaneously. That means night sections, weekend programs, online coursework, and accelerated programs. In this fall at South Piedmont, where my college, we introduce multiple approaches that are designed to provide this flexibility to reduce those the time frames for students to complete their credentials and to minimize the barriers for their success. And what you can see here is an Associate of Arts degree program, one that can be completed in 1 year. And if you look, students that are enrolled, these students take 2 classes that are integrated together. This year, we provided laptops and hotspots so that and we capped their tuition at $1,500 for the entire degree. The courses are in 5-week sessions. And by having the outcomes in both classes that are integrated, students can accelerate their learning. Now, these classes are currently taught in a synchronous online format on Tuesday and Thursday nights and on Saturday mornings. And we're also introducing a new model of learning called HyFlex, which stands for Hybrid Flexible. And in these courses, students can shift between online, face-to-face, or a mix of both of those options throughout the class. And we've also introduced virtual reality into our trades programs. And at South Piedmont, we developed the first fire safety online training program in the state. And while we've hastened the development of the programs this fall, we hope to make what is now innovative commonplace. But to ensure that our pathways are relevant, we must engage with employers, especially now, to validate that we are meeting the current needs of business. For instance, we know that in both pre and post-COVID economy, logistics was a critical pathway. But as we look forward, how is the movement of materials going to change? Drone deliveries, automated trucks, warehouse robotics, and there are technologies yet to be developed. To prepare, we must engage and partner. We must be able to share our resources, whether it's equipment, space, or subject matter experts. The colleges have the capability, the structures, and the resources to develop and award credentials, but the fast-paced movement of technology requires a college to work closely with its business and industry community to remain relevant. Now, as academic developers, you understand the critical need of having a skilled workforce to support a strong economy. But having a more educated society also brings about social benefits for the well-being of our entire state. Research shows there is a correlation between higher levels of education and higher earnings for all racial ethnic groups, for both men and women. Lower levels of unemployment and poverty, lower incarceration rates, better health, and higher levels of civic participation, including volunteerism, blood donation, and voting. It is imperative that we also mindfully integrate foundational and career-focused skills into all of our programs and increase the opportunities for work-based learning experiences. Now, a very successful partnership that the community college system has had with our business and industry community is Apprenticeship NC. Since it became a part of the North Carolina Community College system, the number of people served in this program has increased by 80%. And because this is driven by the business and industry community, the demographics of the relationship mirror the need in the business world. The employer and the student both benefit from the collaboration, and a more skilled and loyal workforce is developed. And as we project out 10 years, I expect that the program itself will grow, but that those industry sectors may change. But the need for collaboration across multiple sectors is going to be the key to a successful future. We can no longer exist as sole entities and expect to weather future disruptions or shifts in the economic landscape. Educational institutions need to focus on transitioning students more seamlessly and sharing resources rather than duplicating them. The same is true with our workforce development and community partners. We need to shift our mindset from competition to collaboration. Now, a perfect example of this type of thinking is the partnership that South Piedmont Community College has with Wingate University. The students that choose this pathway, what we call the Road to Wingate, have a seamless admissions process for both organizations And we have advisors from both Wingate and South Piedmont that guide students along their pathways. Once students reach a certain point in the program, they have all of the opportunities to attend the student life activities at Wingate University. They get to go to games, they get to use their wonderful gym and their library resources. And what is also amazing, there's a scholarship tied to this. For South Piedmont graduates, they will pay no more than $2,500 a year to complete their bachelor's degree at Wingate. So they'll enter as juniors, go only 2 years, and if they take part in our AA in a year, in 3 years, a bachelor's degree for no more than $6,500. That's amazing. So to ensure, though, that we are successful and can be successful in providing a talented workforce for a changing world, we must remove the barriers that limit our ability to develop meaningful, high quality, and creative approaches to learning. And this requires that mindset of collaboration, support, and engagement. We must ensure funding streams that allow more advanced technology solutions and a willingness to share information, equipment, and other resources. And as we stated at the start of this pandemic, we are all in this together. And our future will depend on our ability to reimagine our present. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Your leadership of South Piedmont Community College is impressive. We appreciate you being with us. Before I turn the virtual podium back over to NCDA President Randall Johnson, I'd like to remind everyone to visit the virtual exhibit hall on our conference website. We thank the following companies for their support of NCDA as a virtual exhibitor: 365-Degree Total Marketing, Arco Design Build, Bobbitt Design Build, Convergent Nonprofit Solutions, DMJ and Company, Duke Energy, ECS Southeast, DEI Group, MBP, McGill Associates, Realtors Commercial Alliance Southeastern NC, SKA Consulting Engineers, Centerra Corporation, Terracon Consultants, and UGI Energy Services. Now I'll turn it over to Randall, who will offer some closing remarks.
Thank you to all of our speakers this morning for the excellent remarks. We appreciate you sharing your expert perspectives with us today to help us sharpen our focus on the decade ahead. Clearly, we'll have a lot of work to do bringing our economy back to full strength, but our fundamental assets and strengths will remain long after the pandemic subsides. If we prepare and act now, North Carolina can embrace some truly exciting opportunities ahead. Now we'll transition to our lunch break. We encourage you to take a technology break, grab lunch, and then join us again at 12:30 for networking. Our program will reconvene at 1 with 2 concurrent panel sessions, one focused on value chain access and networks and delivery systems, and the other showcasing product development, including some case studies. At 2 p.m., please join us for the final panel session focused on the site selection process and opportunities during these challenging times. Thank you again to today's annual conference sponsors we showed you earlier, as well as that long list of annual sponsors. These important companies and organizations stand with us and with our members year-round, offering engagement in our activities and financial support to fulfill NCEDA's important mission. And we're grateful for these annual sponsors and their partnership. Our Longleaf Pine sponsors are the Alliance Consulting Engineers and Electricities of North Carolina. Dogwood sponsors are North Carolina Southeast and Stewart. Patron sponsors are Big Boom Design, Brand Acceleration, DMJ and Company, Dominion Energy, Duke Energy, Energy United, Greenfield, Monroe Union County Economic Development, Nexen Pruitt, Norfolk Southern, the North Carolina Biotechnology Center, North Carolina Community Colleges, North Carolina Electric Cooperatives, the North Carolina Railroad Company, Samet Corporation, and Smith Anderson. We also thank our media partner, WRAL TechWire, and of course, the NC Department of Commerce and EDP&C for their continued close partnership with us. I know NCEDA members join me in thanking these generous organizations and companies for the important role they play in our mission 365 days a year. Their financial support is crucial to our being able to continue offering programs like the one we're enjoying today. Now, enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you back here shortly. Thank you.
Wow, we just had 2 outstanding breakout sessions. Thanks so much to Joe, Dana, and Gerald for sharing key information about supply, value chain, accessibility, and to Chuck and Ernie for sharing innovative ideas for product development. We'd also like to thank Withers and Ravenel for sponsoring breakout sessions this afternoon. We're now in the home stretch. We appreciate everyone's support of NCDA and for attending our first ever virtual conference. We know many folks are zoomed out, and we're grateful that you're here with us today. I'd now like to turn things over to Marvin Price, who will moderate our final panel, Site Selection During COVID-19.
Thank you, John. I'm excited to be with you guys this afternoon, and I'm honored to moderate this panel. Welcome to the final session of NCEDA's 2020 Annual Conference, Site Selection During COVID-19. We're lucky to have 2 renowned site selection consultants with us this afternoon to share their insights and how the site selection process has adapted during COVID-19 and their ideas on how communities and state can foster a post-pandemic economic recovery. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Terracon Consultants for sponsoring this segment. We appreciate your continued support of NCEDA. All right, let's get started. I'm pleased to introduce Jeanette Goldsmith and Chris Lloyd. Jeanette is the Vice President of Strategic Development Group, where she specializes in site selection, incentive negotiations for clients across this globe, the country. Jeanette's background spans more than 20 years in site selection, incentive negotiations, and economic development consulting with McCallum Sweeney, and then her own company, Goldsmith Strategy. Chris leads McGuire Woods Consulting, infrastructure and economic development team. He specializes in site selection and economic development incentive negotiations. Chris has worked on corporate expansions and relocations across the country, and has also worked closely with clients on numerous public-private partnerships for transportation and infrastructure needs. I'd like to start by giving Jeanette and Chris each a couple of minutes to share opening remarks with us. Jeanette, let's start with you.
Thank you, Marvin. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I hope that you've had a wonderful conference, albeit a little different. Certainly a different time for all of us. At Strategic Development Group, it's been no different. We had started off the year with coming off of our best year ever in terms of projects and revenue, and we're rolling through 2020, really looking forward to what this year might bring. Things slowed down a little bit. Our world turned upside down like it did for everyone else, but we're happy to report that we have a number of active projects that kept on moving through the pandemic. We even had an announcement just last week in Mesa, Arizona, and we're looking forward to seeing what the rest of the year has to hold.
And Marvin, thank you for hosting this, and thanks for the sponsors for putting this together. This is Chris Lloyd at McGuire Woods Consulting. I'm here in Richmond, Virginia, and it really is a pleasure to be with everybody today. And John introduced this. It was the first NCDA virtual conference. I don't know about the rest of you, but I also hope it is the last virtual conference that anybody has. I'm very active in the Virginia Economic Developers Association, and I hope we never have another one either, just because this is a relationship and a trust business. And getting to see people and be with people is absolutely integral. So I'm looking forward to getting back to that normal. And I'm not going to call it the new normal because I want to be back to the old normal. But it really is a pleasure, particularly to be with folks from North Carolina. My in-laws live in North Carolina. They live in Macon County. And so anything I can do to help with the prosperity of North Carolina, I want, because otherwise they're going to end up living in my attic here in Richmond, Virginia. So it really is a pleasure to be with y'all and talk a little bit about the trends that Jeanette and I are seeing. We're both colleagues in the Site Selectors Guild, and I think you really have a good indication or a finger on the pulse of what's going on in the industry. With regards to our business, very similar to Jeanette, 2019 was a phenomenally good year, our best year with regards to projects and revenue that we'd ever seen, and had just an incredible pipeline that was coming together. Last year, it was very strange. The summer just got really quiet, but late September, early October just exploded. We had a number of projects in the pipeline, and then March hit, and it's been interesting since then. But we'll talk a little bit about that later. So thanks, Marvin, for letting us have the chance to be with y'all today.
No, absolutely. Thank you guys for joining. So I want to go ahead and jump right in because I want to leave enough time to answer any questions that we might have from the audience. So for both of you, can you describe how your project pipeline has been since COVID-19?
Sure. I'll start us off. We had, I think I should start by saying that the work that we do at Strategic Development Group is very much focused on heavy industrial type projects. So we do some office type projects and some warehouse and distribution, but primarily focused on heavy industrial projects. And at the beginning of the year, and had a nice book of business. Once the COVID pandemic hit, we ended up with 3 clients that really wanted to continue to push forward regardless of the pandemic. Those clients were in building materials and chemical sectors, and those clients haven't slowed down at all. We did have one client that did slow down as a result, put their project on hold indefinitely. That one is in the automotive sector. And then, as I referenced earlier, we had an announcement just last week. Commercial Metals Corporation announced a new merchant bar mill in Mesa, Arizona, and that was one of our projects that we've been working on since the beginning of the year. So we're quite excited about that.
Similar to Jeanette, ours has varied by sector and by industry. It really has, the pipeline is still there. It's just, again, a great deal of variation by industry. We do a lot, for the most part, our client base falls within, and just to be clear, we only do private sector work. We don't do any public sector or EDO advising here. We only represent private clients. So it's entirely dependent upon those site selection activities. Most of our work falls in food and beverage, warehouse and logistics, advanced manufacturing with a particular focus on aviation, which build off the project, or I always consider my marquee project was the Honda Jet deal in Greensboro. And then a lot in the corporate office kind of space, which includes data centers. And there's been a great deal of variation across those industries. In the office sector, we've had one IT client that did a major announcement here in Virginia with 700 jobs we just announced it 4 weeks ago. They just feel that the market is continuing to be strong and they intend to go forward. We also, however, do a lot of the hospitality space in their office, the data center and shared service for hospitality. That's absolutely dead right now. Because while I think the hospitality sector is going to come out long-term doing well, they're fighting for survival right now. Similar to Jeanette, warehouse and distribution remains very strong with us. And interestingly, we've started picking up a lot of work in the solar space, which had not been a strong sector for us, but there's a lot of solar and renewable energy development project going on all around the country, but particularly in the Southeast. So we're picking up a number of those projects. And then food and beverage, which I noted was one of our sectors, that remains very, very strong for us. We are particularly strong in the protein space. So those companies faced a lot of challenges in the initial days of the COVID crisis with spread at their facilities. And so as you can imagine, new projects kind of fell to the back burner. But now that we've gotten past that, in fact, most of them are have got that situation well under control, and our models for what other people are doing, those projects are starting to come on back online. So, but what we're also seeing, though, is the only other thing that I would add is people are taking a little bit longer to make decisions than they were previously. A lot of kicking the tires, but there's still projects out there for sure.
Marvin, I just would add to Chris said, we have in the last month or so, put together a record number of proposals, at least for Strategic Development Group, for new projects, all in the private sector space. And, you know, to reiterate what Chris said, I think there's a lot of activity primarily in the consumer goods area. Food and beverage, of course, we're staying home, we're ordering more food online, we're that, you know, so that segment is growing. Things like mattresses and flooring and anything that might do with your home. You're staying in your home more, and those, we're seeing that there's a lot of activity in those segments. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that in the food and beverage, the alcohol segment of the food and beverage industry is growing like crazy. So.
Well, I would be lying to you if I didn't say that was one of the things that I was going to miss the most about our annual conference at the beach. But actually, you guys brought something up that really makes sense, but I wanted to kind of gain a little bit more insight on that. So what percentage of your clients are putting projects on hold, and for how long?
Chris, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll start. I would say probably half of the projects we walked into the year with are either now on hold in some form or fashion, or they're just being drawn out. You know, the people were intended to make decisions by the spring or summer, and now they're saying, well, you know, fall, winter, or more likely first quarter of 2021 is looking really good for us. So we're still involved. We're still talking to folks. We're still exploring sites. We're still running pro formas. But that about 50% of them are just kind of slowing things down. They're not sure, you know, and this, you know, we can talk about this more later, you know, kind of what are the common themes we're hearing from folks. There's a lot of uncertainty regarding the election, a lot of concern regarding consumer sentiment, and other issues that are out there that I think people are putting on hold. Other ones are just, it's full steam ahead, that we see a market opportunity in those that are willing to be bold and know that this is not a depression in the normal economic sense. This is an economic shock to the system. And that while it's painful, it will come back and will come back pretty quickly. And that those that are willing to be bold and had enough cash to ride this out, they're willing to continue forward. Jeanette?
So I would say our percentage of projects is probably more 25 to 30% that were put on hold. One is sort of an indefinite hold, and I think it probably will be another year or so before it comes back. Another one, though, I suspect it'll be first or second quarter next year. I think what we're starting to see now is, as we hopefully come out of the pandemic and the economic shock, we are right on the verge of an election. So those sort of three things together are going to push projects that have been put on hold maybe out a little bit longer. We'll get the results of the election, that'll settle down. Hopefully we'll get past the pandemic, and then I think we'll see a couple of projects, at least from our perspective, that'll pick back up.
Okay, well, Chris, you kind of gave me a bone with this one. So what are the common things that you're hearing from clients right now?
Yeah, I mean, again, I expected when we did our plan this year, just like 2016, or really like 2012, that, you know, there would be a lot of uncertainty regarding the election. And I think people are waiting to see what's going to happen. I think people are waiting to see, there was the announcement yesterday that the Chinese and the U.S. trade negotiators agreed that they were going to continue to move forward with the phase one trade deal. But I think a lot of people are waiting to see, is that really going to happen? Or is that just political posturing? I noted consumer sentiment. Like I noted earlier, Marvin, that we do a lot in the office space. And I think people are just all over the place as to what's going to happen with corporate office. You hear some people saying the office is dead, others saying, no, it's more alive than ever. What my great fear is that with everybody working from home right now, and they're able to work from home and they're realizing we're able to do this pretty efficiently. When people come back to the office, they're going to say, why do we need 2,000 people sitting around here doing what we're doing? We can probably do this with 1,000 people, with half of them working at home and half of them working here, and be just as efficient. Unfortunately, I don't know that that's great for workers, because I think it impinges more, makes work more of a 24/7 operation more than it already was. But I am concerned about that as a potential trend.
So Marvin, I'll just add that, I mean, I think most people feel like the economy at the moment is fundamentally strong. I mean, yes, as Chris said, we are experiencing an economic shock, but I think that the fundamentals are still there. I had at the beginning of the year sort of secretly wished for a recession this year, because I think in an election year, we always see a slowdown on capital investment projects. It would have been a good time to sort of have that little recession. We could come back out in 21 and start moving on the upswing there. But don't blame me, it wasn't my fault. But I do think that most of our clients are seeing that those fundamentals in our economy, our consumer markets are still strong. I think a lot is going to depend on how quickly we come out of this pandemic and get back to normal.
Okay, well, Jeanette, if you don't mind, just going right back to you, what industries are you getting the most inquiries from? I know you guys said food and beverage, but any others?
So so food and beverage, clearly one of the top growing industries. Medical devices, there are rumblings that as a result of the pandemic, we are going to require more medical device, and that's everything from cotton swabs to ventilators, be produced in the United States, so that we don't face the situation that we faced this year again. That's not mandated yet, but there's rumblings about that and about how that's going to impact companies and where they manufacture goods. So medical devices is another area. Chris mentioned data centers. I think we're seeing, obviously, everyone's at home, everyone's online, and that there's some growth in that area as well. Chris, I'm sure you have some other thoughts on that.
You covered it very well. So again, on data centers, you can't have enough space to store cat videos.
Yeah.
So we need to build more of those. So.
Okay, well, I kind of feel like you guys are looking at my notes, because I wanted to go into the idea of reshoring. So what's the outlook on FDI in the coming 3 years?
Mm-hmm. Chris, I'll start, because I might have a little bit of the cynic's opinion on this. Since the election of Donald Trump in 2016, we've been hearing a lot about FDI and reshoring. We knew we were pulling out of TPP. We knew that Donald Trump was going to enact different trade policies vis-a-vis China. We knew he was going to renegotiate NAFTA, and everyone pontificated that was going to be a surge of reshoring projects and FDI projects. And it happened a little bit, but certainly not the surge that was indicated. Now we are here in COVID, and again, people are saying this is going to be it. This is the tipping point. We're going to see a huge surge in FDI and reshoring. And again, I feel, and I don't have a crystal ball, I feel like we will continue to see some growth in FDI and reshoring, but I don't think it's going to be the tsunami that maybe others do. So.
Yeah, I agree with Jeanette. Although I'll draw a slight distinction between FDI and onshoring or reshoring, because I think FDI, again, I think the pandemic is going to show that the U.S. market is going to remain the strongest and biggest and most resilient in the world, and every company is going to want to be here. And particularly if energy prices continue to stay low in the U.S. vis-a-vis the rest of the world, for energy intensive industries, I think a lot of them are going to continue to want to put presence here. But I share with Jeanette, I'm very dubious of how much onshoring or reshoring there's going to be. I think, as Jeanette accurately pointed out, I think, critical supplies where we realized that our supply chains were stretched too thin or too far for vital necessities, you're going to see some of that investment in the United States. But still, at the end of the day, labor cost is a big factor. And the idea of, do you bring it back to the United States and pay increasingly $15 an hour or more because of minimum wage requirements, or do you shift from China to Vietnam or Indonesia and pay $1 an hour? That's a really hard input to overcome. And so I think you'll see companies diversifying their supply chain, but how much of it actually re-lands back on US soil or even North American soil, I still remain very dubious, particularly, again, pharmaceuticals or other items where it's a relatively low margin business at the base pharmaceuticals, not high-end specialty things where, pennies on the dollar matter. I, again, remain very dubious.
Thank you guys for that. So turning away from reshoring and FDI, let's talk about some of the speculation in regards to urban versus rural. So there's been talk about projects trending towards more rural, less populated areas. What are you guys seeing in that?
Chris, why don't you start us off?
I'll start off with that. For those of you who participate in the Site Selectors Guild, you may have seen we put out we just surveyed our membership recently and did a webinar on this last week or the week before, where we talked about that we as the Guild were starting to see among our clients a shift, not necessarily always to rural, Marvin, but a shift certainly away from the large urban coastal cities to more interior cities. And actually had Raleigh on that list as one of the beneficiaries, that the mid-sized metros were going to be a big winner in that. Greenville was on the list. Jeanette, Columbia, South Carolina was, Nashville, Boise, Idaho, Kansas City were going to be winners. And then when we did the webinar, we had one of our colleagues spoke about, in fact, I think it was Mark spoke about it, Jeanette, about the rule shift. You're certainly seeing it. I think, telework and remote working is going to bring some opportunities, not necessarily for big job creators in rural areas, but allow for people to live in rural areas and still have a good job. So it's not going to be like you're going to have, you're not going to have a Fortune 100 company locate in the middle of nowhere, but you might be able to have some of those workers who can live in the middle of nowhere or in a rural area and have a good quality of life and not have to commute into New York City or whatever. And then again, I think there is some variation by industry that I think you could see food and beverage is always concentrated in rural areas, often because of utility availability or, they don't want to be close to other neighbors. I think some other industries might have that opportunity as well, particularly if there's some of these smaller onshoring opportunities that are out there to build up the supply chain. Jeanette, anything you'd add?
No, I think you hit it right on the head that, the rural communities are going to win not by attracting new projects, companies, physical facilities, but by attracting people and talent. And I think that's important. The only other point I'll make, Marvin, is again, on the heavy industrial side where we focus, COVID isn't going to change where they start to look. They are all logistics and energy price driven. So wherever the logistics network says they need to be, wherever the energy prices are most appropriate, that's where they're going to be, even if it's in downtown Philadelphia. So.
No, I understand that. So, Jeanette, if you don't mind, we noticed that heavy industrial projects typically sometimes go for the greenfield sites. So what trends are you seeing in site readiness and certifications are you envisioning over the next 3 to 5 years?
Oh, Marvin, we could be here for another hour. So I'll start by saying that the principles of site certification are always going to be important. Making sure that you have done your homework on your site, that you have a base knowledge about your site, whether it's from a utility perspective or an environmental perspective. In terms of site certification programs, I think they're going to still be around. I mean, I know the Site Selection Guild is working on developing a national set of standards. But my personal opinion is that these programs have gotten too far away from their original intent. And their original intent was designed to find good sites and evaluate and make them more marketable. Certainly the technical components are important, but that really, in my opinion, shouldn't be what defines a project-ready site. What should define a project-ready site is a site that is that's going to have some marketability, where you can understand what the site looks like and what type of industry it might be attractive to. And I fear that the site certification world has sort of gotten away from that. And one of the things that I think is most important about site evaluation or certification is understanding what your target industries are going to be, what your target end uses are, and making sure your product is appropriate. And I ran across a great example just last week of a community who wanted to be in or was interested in attracting investments in the specialty chemical arena. Well, their certified site was 30 acres, and that's not going to cut it. So making sure that you've got a connection between the sites you have in your portfolio and the target end uses that you desire is, I think, more important than checking off all of the technical boxes. So, Chris?
No, I think Jeanette captured it perfectly.
Okay, well, Chris, we're gonna stay with you. How has COVID-19 impacted the real estate factors for office buildings, flex space, and manufacturing facilities?
I think we're still trying to figure it out, to be honest. Every week you read something new about, like I said earlier, whether offices are dead or offices are going to see a new revival. I think, we're still sorting out, are manufacturers going to flee the cities, or are they going to recongregate to the cities? Are distribution facilities going to come back to the city because they need to fill in that last mile network, or are they going to flee the city so they can get to bigger and bigger distribution facilities to serve the e-commerce market? Honestly, don't know. I mean, I think it is literally all over the place. The only thing I will say is somehow I've gotten, the amount of content that's now available for free out there is absolutely astonishing. And I'm not endorsing this one particular, but I will say, and they're in the real estate business, CBRE, they do a phenomenal job, their research group. And they have these weekly webinars and all. And what you're seeing from them and others in the industry, Cushman & Wakefield, others that are putting out this content, is the institutional investor is still very strong out there and is building a lot of product. So there is clearly a confidence in development, whether it's industrial, whether it's warehouse and manufacturing. There's a lot of money out there to be had, institutional money that's investing in these products. And so, my suggestion to many in the economic development community is not to solely just focus on the end user, but really look at those institutional investors, because there's billions, if not trillions of dollars of money sitting out there that's looking for a rate of return that's better than the 10 basis points you will get in a certificate of deposit right now. And people think that there's some incredible opportunities in commercial real estate. So again, while I don't think people know exactly what's going to happen, again, with the office of the future or the manufacturing side of the future, there's a lot of money out there that's pumping money into projects, and it should be chased.
Okay, well, Chris, we're going to stay with you on this question. Have there been any new workforce development requirements that companies are asking for, or incentives being sought as a result of COVID?
Not necessarily. I think what I see among our client base, and I'd like Jeanette's comments on this, it's the incentives game, again, most of that is shaped by legislative sessions. And most states, if they're having legislative sessions, are only using it to deal with either police reform or budget crisis issues related to COVID. So they really haven't gotten their arms around what we need to do from an incentives perspective yet. I think comes, the winter and the spring, when most sessions go back in, we're going to see some evolution about that, or some discussion of that. And what you're already hearing is incentives for telework and remote working. But what the real problem is reskilling right now. We are not, if you look at the statistics, we are not wanting for jobs in this country. I'll give the sole example of my state, home state of Virginia. Continuing unemployment claims in Virginia last week, that's continuing people who have been out of work week after week. We had 330,000 people in continuing claims last week. If you go to the Virginia Employment Commission website, there are 466,000 jobs posted.
Wow.
We are not wanting for jobs in this state. And I expect that's very much the case in North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee. There are more jobs than there are even people to fill them. The problem is that there's a complete and total mismatch now between the skills that people have and the jobs that are available. So people that, were making that were making a decent living, making mimosas and Moscow mules 6 months ago, are now not qualified to be doing welding or distribution work or food and beverage manufacturing work where you see the demand. And so what I'm seeing a lot of states and communities grappling with is how do we reskill these people? How do we create pathways forward to get these people from, you know, skills that they had to the kind of jobs that are available? And also the other thing we're seeing is just an acceleration of some of the trends that were already starting to take hold in the economy before the pandemic. And that is the continued move towards automation and use of artificial intelligence. And that has just been further accelerated by this crisis, which again calls for state and local economic development leadership on building these pathways and reskilling of folks. Jeanette, anything you would supplement?
No, I think you covered it very well, Chris.
Well, I was going to wait to ask this question. It came into the chat, but since we're talking about incentives, I want to go ahead and throw this out there. And this question is coming from Mike in the audience. Are you seeing a major impact to economic development projects due to the loss in significant county tax revenue?
I'll start on that one, Marvin. We have, as I mentioned, one announcement, and we're working on another project. We are in the incentive negotiation phase, and we really haven't seen much concern yet about offering incentives to our project and as a result of lower tax revenue. I just haven't seen that yet. Doesn't mean it's not coming, but I think what the county officials that we're working with are hoping is that we will provide those new jobs that perhaps they need at a time when their economy is maybe failing in other areas. I mean, Chris is absolutely right. There's a huge disconnect between the skill levels that my client will require and the skill levels that exist in that marketplace. But what local elected officials are seeing is, you know, unemployment numbers are really high, and I got to do something to get people jobs, right? That's every politician's goal. And so they are willing to perhaps to offer an incentive package for that project because of the jobs that come with it, even though their tax revenues may be strained. The other thing I'll just say on the incentive front, and this is something that's kind of gotten lost in the noise the last couple of years, is, you know, we are seeing our clients are having impact because of the Tax Act that Donald Trump passed. Chris is well versed in this and hopefully can correct me after I say what I'm getting ready to say. But I have, for example, my first project that has been given a grant by a community that will be subject to corporate income tax as a result of the Tax Act. So that is probably impacting our incentive negotiations and our incentive valuations more so than actual tax revenues and COVID impact.
Yeah, I agree with Jeanette. There is that impact because of the Tax Act and you know, specifically with the way that incentives are created, so I mean, or structured. So that's causing some changes. But I'll also note, going back to your core question, Marvin, is yeah, I think there's some rhetoric and fear out there regarding localities curtailing incentives because of the economic impact or the economic crisis right now. But if you look at the facts, at least the preliminary facts so far, what's coming out is local revenues aren't suffering a whole lot. And that's because if you look at the composition of where localities get their money, it's property taxes. And I don't know about you, but I just got my reassessment for my county and they didn't go down in the price. You know, so the economy shrank 33% last quarter, but my assessment went up 10%. And so, and then so that's the biggest portion of local revenue. The next largest portion of local revenue is sales taxes. And I think, you know, the Wall Street Journal reported 2 weeks ago that we're now back to consumer spending levels above where we were pre-pandemic, because it's not that the spending is eroded, it's just shifted. And most states have now adopted Wayfair provisions so that they are capturing the sales taxes from those transactions happening, even if someone doesn't have physical presence there. So, you know, where I'm seeing the concern is that the revenues aren't falling off, it's just the expenses are getting higher. For localities because they're having to pay overtime. They're having to buy PPE for their people. And you're starting to see where I've seen it, and it's not yet in North Carolina, but I've started seeing it in some of the Midwestern states where you have independent school districts where a lot of times people would request a break from the school tax, is you're starting to see a lot of pushback in that area. In that localities are saying, hey, wait a second, we've got all these costs associated with reopening our schools. Why should we be giving away some of that money for corporations? And so that's where I'm starting to see the pushback.
Okay, so for both of you, could you discuss the quality of life considerations impacting site selection right now?
Chris, you wanna?
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, I think it's the same as it always has been. People want to live somewhere that they find desirable, that they find affordable, that the schools are good, that it has, quality recreational activities. I don't think that it's changed. I think there is some factor in there. And I talked about this earlier about a shift away from the large coastal cities that people feel, well, maybe we don't want to be in a New York, San Francisco, whatever, with people stacked on top of each other, which creates problems. But, let's be honest, for those two localities and those two states, people were already leaving, and it wasn't just because of quality of life. It was because they were being regulated and taxed to death. We've got several of our clients we're working with now that have a presence on the West Coast. And the way that those states have reacted to this COVID crisis by shutting down businesses, by creating more burdens on business with regards to how they bring back workers with paid leave and all. We've had several clients that just said, we just can't stand it anymore. Get us out of here. And so that is, I think, just as much of a factor as quality of life in impacting economic development decisions. Jeanette, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to a concept that we talked about earlier, but first, Marvin, to address the question, I mean, I think quality of life as a factor in site selection decisions hasn't changed as a result of COVID or our current situation. For manufacturing projects and heavy industrial projects, it's a very low-weighted factor. All of that workforce is coming from that community. They live there. They obviously like living there. And so it's a much less important factor. For office projects where you're doing a lot of recruitment from outside, it's a very important factor. But one of the things that I think is important to note about quality of life as a factor is the fact that most of the new jobs that have been created since 2008 and are likely to be created are contract jobs. They're not FTEs. And so those contractors can live anywhere, and they're going to choose to live in places that offer them the quality of life that they want. That might be a big city life, but more often what we're seeing is that it is more of a rural lifestyle where they can bike and hike and ski and be outdoors and raise a family in a smaller environment, afford a house. And so I think quality of life, quality of place needs to be considered as a factor, not for attracting a new facility, as we said earlier, but rather to attract people.
Yeah, the only real life example I'll give, and this was not North Carolina, it wasn't a North Carolina community, but we had a client a few years ago where all the objective factors lined up for one location, from a training perspective, from a logistics perspective, from a cost doing business perspective, it all lined up for this one location. And that night, the local economic development team took us all out to dinner in their downtown. And we walked out of the restaurant at night and it was a ghost town. Everything was boarded up. There was no activity. And the client, we went back to the hotel and they said, this is somewhere we would never want to locate because it's just dead. And just that quality of place, which is the term Jeanette used, or the curb appeal, that can, I mean, it's not going to be the initial screening factor. I mean, this was down to the 2 finalist sites. Those kind of investments in a sense of place, in just what it looks like, it is absolutely critical in making the final decision.
Okay, well, every economic developer wants to get the attention of site selection consultants. So this question is around that idea and thought process. With economic developers investing more in virtual marketing, what stands out among the different information tools and presentation formats to you all? Jeanette, can we start with you?
I'm happy to start. So I want to start by saying I don't think that virtual Zoom site visits are going to ever replace boots on the ground. And I actually had to travel on a project in early June, and I'm traveling now on a project. And it's because I cannot make a recommendation to my client without actually seeing the product. Having said that, I do think there's time and place and room for the virtual site visits and the technologies that we can use, whether it's virtual reality, drone, artificial reality, those sorts of things. But I'm here, I do want to tell you that I recognize, and I'm sure Chris and our other colleagues do as well, that it is your job as economic developers to show your community in the best possible light. And when you get to control the technology, I don't necessarily know that I'm seeing the whole picture, because it's my job to uncover the risks, uncover the weaknesses. And again, if I'm not controlling the technology, it's harder for me to do that. So I think there'll always be this need to find a way to use that technology where it's useful for both you as a community trying to show your community and your site, and me as the site selector who's trying to really understand the strengths and weaknesses of that location.
Yeah, I couldn't agree. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Jeanette that at the end of the day, you need to touch it, feel it, smell it, see it for a site decision. But I mean, this is an incredible opportunity, I think, for many economic development professionals to use this opportunity to raise awareness and exposure to their communities through virtual site visits. You know, again, just the chance to expose us to a community, just so we're aware of it, so we have some knowledge of the community. And I participated in one about a month ago, which was probably the best that I've seen during this whole session. It was done by a group out of Southern Idaho, and they had put together, they had mailed us ahead of time a care package with goodies that were associated with each of their communities in their region. And it was integrated into the story that they told as we did the site tour. So they had the regional economic development person kind of hosted it, and then she had each of the economic development leads for their communities on, and they would speak, they would have a video where they were standing in front of some notable feature in their community talking about energy or site availability or a large employer. Then that person would come on and tell a personal story, and we wore the hat from Idaho, or we held a potato or something like that. And it was extremely well done. And it just made an incredible impression on me. Instead of just sitting here and, one right after the other, okay, well, next go to slide 56 and tell you this, and let's go to slide 57 and we'll show you the art center here. It was a very interactive way of raising exposure. And I think, this is a time, while again, Jeanette's right, that when you're making a final decision, you got to be there in sight. But this is a time that you can use to raise awareness of the opportunities in your community and what great things are going on, because that's valuable information that we're going to tuck in the back of our heads when we have client needs in the future.
Yep. Wow, there's some great information. I had to take notes myself on that. So what's the best way communities and regions to provide information to consultants right now?
Well, I think Chris, gave a great example, and pre-COVID and even during COVID, face-to-face is the best. It's hard to ignore someone who's either sitting across the table or sitting on the other side of the screen. It's really easy to ignore a piece of mail or an email. So face-to-face interactions are still the best. I'm sure Chris is in the same boat. We could be on a Zoom call with an economic development agency every single day if we chose to, and that's fine.
This is my third this week.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I think that that's a good strategy. I do, however, think that that economic development agencies need to partner. I don't want all 100 counties from North Carolina. Maybe it's a regional approach. Maybe if there's something innovative to it. And Chris gave a great example, but face-to-face, screen-to-screen, that's still the best way.
Yeah, the only thing that I'd add is make it relevant. What I've had is a number of organizations, and people have heard me say this before, they'll sign me up not only for their economic development updates, but community updates. So I know that next week is the shrimp boil, and they would like me to come. or that mulch is available for free at the dump this weekend, and eventually, or that the watermelon queen is being crowned. And that's just not relevant to my job. And eventually it gets to be annoying such that I block that I use the block sender function on the computer. But if you're sending me relevant information regarding new sites that are available, or new trends in workforce development, or talent retention, or new trends in incentives, that's relevant information and is always well received.
Okay, so a question about North Carolina in general. What are clients saying about the quality of North Carolina's leadership during this pandemic?
I'll start off with that because I get that question a lot, not specific to North Carolina, but generally, Marvin. I'll just go ahead and take it head on. The question I get is, are people going to not go to states which are perceived as COVID hotspots, or did it wrong? First, I'll say I don't think there's a big perception that North Carolina did it wrong. But the case counts in North Carolina are certainly higher than they are here in Virginia. But it's not a significant difference. I think 2 years from now, people are going to forget which states had breakouts and which didn't, except for New York and a couple others, which where you had such horror stories unfolding. So I think there's whether a state opened for retail in May or opened in June, people aren't going to. There's going to be I don't think there's going to be any recognition of that. I think there is going to be recognition, though, of what policies states put into place in reaction to it. And I alluded to this earlier. If you look at some of the policies coming out of California or other states, I don't mean to make this political, but the more blue states that are out there that are putting into place, laws of presumption for workers' compensation, that it's assumed that if you got COVID, you got it at your workplace. It's policies of that when you bring back people, you need to bring back people in order of seniority, regardless of whether they align with where you have your needs. If you're looking, states that are putting into place extreme policies on workplace safety, or that are, you look at some of the northeastern states, which are talking again about millionaires taxes to fill budget holes. I think that's where you're going to have more of an impact, and North Carolina ranks very well in that. North Carolina has not succumbed to a lot of onerous regulations or onerous tax policies. And there's been, it appears to me, very bipartisan consensus about that. Yes, there's been some battles back and forth between the governor and the legislature on when to open and when to reopen. There's obviously the problems at the North Carolina Department of Transportation, which I think we're all aware of, have been getting some press. But I think most people feel that North Carolina has handled it pretty well. And at the end of the day, North Carolina's got a great reputation and a great product to sell. Very talented people, highly educated, great sites, reasonable regulatory policies, reasonable tax policies. And it's been that consistent dedication to those kind of trends or policies, not just governor to governor, but decade after decade. And that, as long as those policies are maintained, I think North Carolina will continue to do well. Jeanette?
Well, you said it very well, Chris, and I'll just add, I think oftentimes these political issues, whether it's how we handled COVID or whether it's HB2 or abortion laws, and I again don't want to get political, we seem to think that they're going to have these huge impacts on investment decisions, and they just don't. Companies have to be where they have to be. It's about logistics. It's about energy prices. It's about workforce. And yes, a company CEO may disagree with a state's regulatory policy or disagree with a governor's politics, but at the end of the day, that has very little meaning or very little sway over the investment decision. And I agree with Chris. I mean, this is like many controversies, this is going to be forgotten in a couple of years. So. I should just say I'm not making any comment on how North Carolina did. I think they did fine, but in general, my comment is about the way states have handled the COVID crisis.
I appreciate you guys for sharing. And this is for the audience. Please don't forget to drop your questions if you have any into the box. So last question for the group. What are 3 specific recommendations to make to North Carolina more competitive and attracting high quality jobs and investment. I'll start off with you, Jeanette.
Okay, thank you. I think that maintaining the economic development infrastructure has to be on that list. Maybe not one, but it has to be on that list. And I hate to bring this up, but I think North Carolina has finally overcome the switch from commerce to EDP&C, and that you got to leave that in place and let that bird fly, because if you don't, then you risk sliding back. Again, I don't know that that's number one, but it's got to be on the list. I think continuing the things that you do so well in terms of workforce and education, making sure that you are filling, that you're aligning the people of North Carolina with the skill sets that are going to be required. And then I think the investment in infrastructure, and I'm specifically thinking about ports and rail and your interstate systems. I think that you've done, as a South Carolinian, you are head and shoulders above where we are in investment in infrastructure. And I think that needs to continue.
Yeah, I agree with all of those points. I mean, particularly on infrastructure. I mean, North Carolina has a reputation as a good road state.
Mm-hmm.
And I even noticed that we drive to our in-laws, as I noted earlier. And, when I cross from Virginia to North Carolina, it's like from, driving onto glass when I get into North Carolina. I mean, the interstate's smooth and clean. And, when I get into Virginia, it's sometimes a little bit rough. We're getting better. We thankfully raised some transportation taxes and are catching up. But I think North Carolina has traditionally invested well in infrastructure, and that pays off. I think there's two other points, and that is the only, and I don't mean this to be negative, but I think that North Carolina could probably do a better job of telling its story. In that I think North Carolina has been, for the past, and some of this may be, Jeanette alluded to the transition from commerce to EDP&C a couple of years ago. And this is not that y'all do a bad job of telling your story, but you're not as aggressive as some other states. In marketing, economic development. You look at what New York does, or Tennessee, or Louisiana, or Georgia. I mean, they're just tens of millions of dollars in marketing and awareness raising, and y'all have got a great story to tell. And convincing the legislature to let y'all to make those investments in marketing and telling the North Carolina story, because you do have a great story to tell. You don't have to cover up some of the inadequacies that some of those other states have. Y'all have got a great story to tell. And I think, that would be the one recommendation. The second one is figuring out the issue that I alluded to earlier, and that is how do you reskill or upskill all these people that have been impacted by the pandemic, whose jobs will never come back. And how do you create the talent pathways for them? And again, North Carolina has a very good educational and training infrastructure in place for that, but the system's changing very, very rapidly. And the vocational training programs need to incorporate more regarding artificial intelligence and automation into that process, so that we can be preparing people not only for blue collar jobs, but the adjustments that are taking place in white collar jobs. Whole industries are going to be wiped out through automation and artificial intelligence, real estate, insurance, financial services, which are big hallmarks of the North Carolina economy over the next 10 years. And figuring out how to pivot with all that's going to be absolutely critical.
Yeah, Chris, I agree with you on the marketing, and I do think that part of that marketing gap is this transition that just took, in my opinion, too long. So I agree with you 100% on your point regarding marketing.
Okay.
Yeah, no, sorry.
No, you're fine, Chris.
And again, I didn't mean that to be critical. It's not saying that North Carolina does a poor job of marketing. It's just you're not as aggressive as a lot of other states. And again, you have a great story to tell.
Yes, agreed.
Okay, so before we wrap up, I want to give you both an opportunity to give your closing remarks or any statements of advice to the economic development practitioners on the line. Jeanette, we'll start with you.
Sure, absolutely. So my closing comment to the economic development entities and professionals here today is that this is the perfect time to get your house in order. You might not be seeing the same project load that you were seeing a year ago. We are coming up on an election. things are going to slow down, and that is the time where you need to look internally, make sure that you've got the things in place that you need to be successful. That's a good strategic plan. That's strong networks and relationships with all of your allied organizations, whether it's education, utilities, tourism, whatever those allied organizations are in your community, making sure that those relationships are solid, working on your sites, working on your marketing plan, working on your website, all of those things that you do internally or should be doing internally that you often find yourself too busy to do because you're responding to RFPs and networking with site consultants and doing site visits. This is the time to get your house in order.
I couldn't agree more with Jeanette. I call it, this is the time to hit the reset button. You know, heading into this economic development, this crisis, I think economic development was under attack. People were like, why do we need to have economic developers when the economy is going so well? I think people are now, if we seize this opportunity, people are going to go, thank God we have economic developers, because we have a real opportunity to lead our state and the regions out of this recovery and underscore why investment in economic development is so important. Thanks, Marvin.
Yep. Thank you, Marvin.
No, thank you guys. So now it's time for us to wrap up. So I'd like to thank our panelists, Jeanette and Chris, for your time this afternoon. Your insight was invaluable. I literally have a complete page of notes. So again, thank you guys for your time. And I'll now turn things back over to John for some final thoughts.
Thank you, Marvin, Jeanette, and Chris. Your insight is invaluable, and I know we all just learned a lot. Before I turn things back over to Randall, I'd like to share a few quick NCDA announcements. Today is the deadline to sign up for NCDA's planning committees for the coming year. The committee sign-up form has been included in the last couple of e-newsletters. If you would like to sign up but can't find the form, just email Liz Dobbin-Smith, our Managing Director for Membership Engagement and Programs. We'd love to have you engaged with us in committee work this program year. Also, be on the lookout soon for the announcement of our 2020 awards nomination period. This is typically open in the spring each year, but was postponed due to the pandemic. NCDA has 2 extraordinary awards, Economic Developer of the Year and Emerging Leader of the Year. The nomination period will open September 1st, so go ahead and start to consider deserving nominees now. Also, one final reminder to support our conference exhibitors. Be sure to visit our virtual exhibit hall on the conference website and learn more about these exceptional companies. It's been a pleasure to serve as the MC for today's conference. I'll now turn things back over to Randall to close us out.
Thank you again to all our speakers for sharing your expert perspectives with us today on sharpening our focus on the decade ahead. Clearly, we'll have a lot of work to do bringing our economy back to full strength, but we do have substantial bright spots and opportunities to build on. If we act now and prepare now, North Carolina can embrace some truly exciting opportunities ahead. Thank you to that long list of annual sponsors we showed you earlier. Their financial support is crucial to our being able to continue offering programs like the one we enjoyed today. And again, thank you to our annual conference gold sponsors, 365° Total Marketing, Duke Energy, ECS Southeast, Electricities of North Carolina Electric Cooperatives, Centera Corporation, and Terracon Consultants. Our silver sponsors, Withers Ravenel. Our bronze sponsors, Draper Aiden Associates, MVP Southgate, and North Carolina's Southeast. And of course, all of our program sponsors, we appreciate your support today. Thanks also to the exceptional NCEDA team who worked to bring you this content today. L2 is Liz Dobbin-Smith, Emily Martin, and Lawrence Bivens. Until next time, stay connected, stay confident, and stay well. Thank you.